Where's the email? Damn thing on top.
Some type of restriction on size. You know, that's what my iPhone does. I can't download it. I can only
Right, I went home and did it on Friday.
and I think my iPhone is, I think it has to do with it.
This is the first time it went on down. And it's not a big.
Well, it's bigger than normal. Normal is
Okay, well, you're not on wireless, that's probably why, because you're listening on it. That doesn't the internet wired. You go back up.
I can, I never had that problem before.
You might just have to minimize. I think you just drag down.
Just get rid of it, you mean?
Yeah, that wireless content setting. Yep, right there. And wireless. Bye. There. And public. You can set it to auto connect.
Go back now.
Then you have to go back to your mail. And then try to just close it. Double click. Double click that. That might not be. Drag one more time down because it doesn't work. Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the West Fargo City Commission meeting, Monday, August 3rd. Please note that there's a sign on the door, and henceforth, we're going to ask that all cell phones be silenced and turned off while we're in our commission meetings, with the exception of Deputy Chief Boyer, Chief Fuller, and if Pierre Freeman is in the room, Emergency Services. We're going to ask that we not be interrupted by the telephone, but obviously Emergency Services are allowed to have theirs on. So thank you for that. Please join me in a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First order of business is to approve the agenda. I have a couple of revisions that have been changed late this afternoon. On the consent agenda, item B, it originally read that it was the 20th edition. It's the 18th edition. And in the regular agenda, item number 2, discussion about the Lohberg-Holcomb area being developed, that has been pulled from this evening's agenda and will appear before the Commission on August 17th at the request of the submitter, Mr. Eberhardt. Those are the only two changes I have. Again, the next order of business is to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner JoDee. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Olson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda with the two revisions as outlined. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next order of business is item C, the approval of the minutes from July 20th, 2020. Pages 3 through 7, it has been distributed. And Commissioners, it's in your packets. There is one notation that changed late this afternoon, and that was with regard to the vote on the Workforce Academy. Commissioner Olson was a yes vote and not a no vote. That has been amended. Again, Commissioners, your pleasure on the minutes.
I make a motion to approve.
Commissioner George moves. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner JoDee seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes with the amendment for the July 20th meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item is the building permit report. It has been distributed. Are there any questions for planning and zoning or inspections, commissioners?
I move to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner George seconds. It's been moved and seconded to approve the building permit as distributed and presented to the commission. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is the consent agenda. A reminder that item B was changed from the Wild's 20th to the 18th edition. A typo there is what requires. So items A, B was amended, C, D, E, and F are as distributed.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner JoDee. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Olson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda with the addition, or the amendment in item B to the Wild's 18th edition. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on, regular agenda. Item number 1 is to hold the first reading and public hearing on the zoning ordinance amendments at 5:30 p.m. on August 3rd, 2020. Mr. Solberg presenting.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioners. This is just simply a addition, small clerical error when we adopted the downtown mixed-use district and the entertainment mixed-use district on January 6, 2020, adding those in addition to what the standards already are. It's standard on all of our zoning districts. Public hearing is scheduled tonight. Planning and Zoning Commission did review and approve this. We did not have any comments on the changes at Planning Commission. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solberg. Questions for Mr. Solberg? Thank you.
Thank you.
What's your pleasure, Commissioners?
Public hearing is scheduled, Mr. President.
We'll close the regular agenda at this point and go into a public hearing. Is there anyone that'd like to speak to the item of the zoning ordinance amendments? Is there anyone who would like to speak about the zoning ordinance amendments for downtown? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to this ordinance change? Hearing none, the public hearing is closed. Again, are there any questions of Mr. Solberg of the intent of these changes? Okay. Your pleasure, Commissioners.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner George. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner JoDee seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the first reading of the zoning ordinance amendment for downtown. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Again, a reminder that item number 2 was pulled from the agenda, so we're moving on to item number 3, which is the second reading of changes to the sump pump ordinance 1160. Mr. Anvik, Director of Public Works.
Good evening, Commissioner President and Commissioners. I'll try and be brief on ordinance 1160, kind of give you a little bit of quick background, and then open it up for questions. Just kind of give you some background on what we were trying to accomplish with this. We were more or less trying to streamline this ordinance for what it is. That ordinance has been out there that, you know, between the months of November 1st and April 1st, you need a waiver to dump into the sanitary sewer system. And this was mainly done for the safety factor of people discharging the sump pump in the winter, icing up sidewalks, streets, etc. But then that also does put a stress on our system. Or now, as we're going, having our wastewater treated in Fargo, that adds a cost to what we're having. in reading the current ordinance that's on the books, we just don't have the manpower or the staff, I should say, to do what is on the current ordinance, which says basically we're going to go into some people's houses, put a tag on there, check, and check to make sure that it's accurate. We really don't want to do that. We don't have the staffing to do that. So that's what we were trying to do to streamline. The trick that we were trying to come up with is how do you get the people that are not currently on the program, into the program without making the people that don't have sump pumps or aren't using the program pay for it. So that's what we were kind of going with. I know the feedback that we've got about blanket and putting it on everybody, that was the idea that we came up at a time, and then having the people that don't have it opt out has met with some resistance on that. So I'll keep it short, and I do have basically kind of the three options that I kind of came up with. Is what we did. We can pass this ordinance as is in the second reading. I would say probably wouldn't go into effect until November 1st is what I would suggest. And then, but we really have to do the communication part, get it out to the community, and let them know and give everybody ample time to opt out that would want to opt out. The second one would be just to do nothing with and just go by the current ordinance currently. And the third option, and in light of the kind of the feedback I've got, is probably something more I would probably look at doing, is maybe getting the direction from the commission at just going back and maybe redoing this ordinance and coming up with a little bit different variation to it. It still needs to be done. We need to streamline this ordinance. But for the feedback that we've been getting from the public in general about having it a blanket fee for everyone. The only problem that we see is, in the end, if the people that are using it aren't paying for it, everybody will end up paying for it in the end through a rate increase because of the volume of water that we're going to end up be sending to Fargo and paying for it. So I actually would like your feedback, so I can open up to any questions that you guys do have right now.
Questions from Mr. Anvick? Commissioner George?
So I reached out and talked to quite a few people on this, and there were people I talked to that had no idea they were supposed to pay for this, and it wasn't that they weren't willing, they genuinely didn't know. So I think, first and foremost, you brought up communication, and I think that should be the first thing, is do a better job of communicating it. Whether when people buy a house, the realtors need to be informing people about this, or whether it shows up on a utility bill or some way. I think communication and getting the message out there that if you're using this, you need to pay for it. And I think I'd be even open to a penalization or a fine if they were to find later, that they weren't. But I think to blanket it across the board and charge everybody for it, I've talked to many, many people that, like you said, have been very resistant against it, don't like it. So my house personally, mine goes outside all year long, even in the winter. It goes out into my lawn. It does not freeze. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Commissioner George. Commissioner JoDee.
So we chatted just a little bit before the meeting, but I'll kind of go through my thoughts publicly. First off, I'm opposed to applying this to everybody and making people opt out. I think that would create a lot of chaos and a lot of challenges. I do think the starting point, though, is in a different spot. I think somewhere we have the data of people or addresses that have paid this fee over the last 10 years. And I suspect, I actually talked to one person that kind of told me that they paid their fee once, and so they're good. They thought they only had to pay it one time. They didn't apparently ever read the messaging that comes out that says they have to pay it annually. So I think the starting point is, let's get those addresses, let's get those imported into our billing system. Let's send those individuals a letter that says, hey, starting September 1st, we're going to start charging you a monthly fee because at some point in time your address has paid this fee, and we assume that you are still taking advantage of this. I think that's a safer assumption for us to make, and that will get more people paying it, because I think asking everybody to literally kind of come in and pay the fee every year instead of just having it automatically done is a huge barrier to collecting. I would imagine we'll get twice as many people to participate if they only have to sign up once versus every year. And so I think that's, I'd rather take it on from a technology perspective and get the system working better, then evaluate what the penalty is for not participating and figure out how to get more people signed up.
What are we,
Commissioner Olson?
what is it costing us in extra money? The amount of money that we're spending on buying drinking water versus how much we're sending over to Fargo.
I don't have the number, I mean, the bulk rate is about even right now. And for cost-wise, I can just go back to, just those 3 days of spring when we had in 3 days almost 30,000 gallons go through that we pumped, during the spring melt, and just, and then, 10 million gallons a day is almost $40,000. And not all of that is from sump pump, but probably 20-30% is. So you're probably looking at, out of that, 3 to 4 million is coming out of people's sump pumps that was going into the sanitary sewer. When we're looking at that, at the end of the day, when we are sending everything over to Fargo, if we, only sell, through, or, bill, I guess, $3.5 million worth of wastewater, but we get the bill for 4.5 from, Fargo, that's just that excess water that we had. The sump pump program, or the sump pumps are part of a two-part of the I&I problem that we do have. The other part is infiltration through our pipe system and manholes, and that is a separate issue that through the CIP we're going to try and tackle, and there's different ways we can go about that. This is an easier or quicker route to limit the amount with people participating in the program. Switching their sump pumps out in the summer is the big part. Put it on your lawn, do that. I understand it's a safety issue in the winter, and that's why the waiver program was created.
So based on our current ordinance, nobody's supposed to ever dump their sump pump water into the sanitary sewer system.
Without a waiver, correct.
And the waiver is only good through the months of November through March.
Yeah. As far as the current ordinances, yes. Now is, with the waiver, it's November 1st to, April 1st are the only months that you can legally discharge into the sanitary sewer.
And that was in place before we started sending our wastewater to Fargo.
Correct.
So this isn't anything that's new, just because we're sending it over there.
The new part is that we're gonna, Commissioner Olson, is that we're gonna charge everybody. That is very new, that we're gonna charge everybody and then have them opt out. But I'll hold off on my question for a minute. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. I understand what the change is, but we have to, the sewer fund is supposed to be self-sufficient, and if we're going backwards, how else are we going to recoup that loss?
I understand that, and
can't steal from
I'll
one.
make a suggestion in a moment,
Okay.
whenever the mayor gives me a moment.
Commissioner Simmons,
I have it.
please.
Thank you, man, a little words, but thank you. I'm seeing a change here tonight, so that's a good thing. I think that what we should actually do, and I would make a motion that we table this, and we've got till November, as you said, come back with 2 or 3 options, Matt. Come back with more of us than just one choice, and see if we, I do agree that we need to make some of this up. It's not free, we gotta pay Fargo, I get that. But I do believe there's options out there, and so I'd make a motion that we table this, and you come back within, take your time and do this right, and come back within, whenever you desire, but come back with 2 or 3 options for us to choose from, not just the one.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner George seconds. Been moved and seconded to table the discussion on the sump pump, change to the ordinance. Additional discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Again, we're to table the motion with regarding to the sump pump discussion. All those in favor of tabling it, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Anvik. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Item number 4 is the approve the recommendations for the 2020 West Fest activities. Ms. Richards.
Thank you, Commission President Dardis, and thank you, Commissioners. I'm here before you tonight to provide a recommendation for our 2020 West Fest activities. At our last Commission meeting, we did transfer coordination duties over to West Fargo Events, but the City of West Fargo is still directing what those activities are, so I am before you tonight to make this recommendation so that we can provide proper direction to West Fargo Events. In your packet, I provided a recommendation memo that talks about the size of Westfest, the policies that I'm looking at as I make this recommendation. And in summary, because of the North Dakota Department of Health's recommendation to cancel gatherings of any size where distancing cannot be maintained, and the CDC's categorization of an event as high risk if people cannot remain spaced at least 6 feet apart and attendees travel from outside the local area, my recommendation is that we cancel the following Westfest activities, but not all activities. And those activities would be the Grand Parade, the Family Fun Event, and the Street Dance. I believe that we can still execute the other events that we typically have, which include community events that are submitted by other organizations, such as pancake feeds, fun runs, anything the Fargo Park District has going on. We also hold a softball tournament. We can coordinate with Penny and Pals for a performance, the craft and vendor show, and also look at adding some events that will help fill out that schedule and still allow us to celebrate West Fargo on smaller scale, or in various independent ways, which include moving Taste of West Fargo to that week, restaurant/shop local week where we're promoting our local businesses, West Feast, which would be a community meal that would be distanced apart and be managed through ticketing, and then a City of West Fargo scavenger hunt. Also based on my proposal, I believe that we would need to cut the 2020 Westfest budget about 50% to $15,000. That's because the parade is the major factor in sponsorships that come in. I'm confident that we will still have a number of community partners that will want to support us, but I think it would be diligent to cut the budget and recognize the fact that we don't have some of those marquee events to bring those dollars in. With that, I am available for any questions.
Commissioners, do you have questions for Mrs. Richards? Commissioner Olson?
How would we maintain social distancing during the softball tournament and the 5 and 10K fun runs?
The softball tournament, there's already some standards in place that the park districts and other organizations are using for sporting events that we would apply here in terms of teams and who's sitting in the dugouts and things like that. The fun run is typically a smaller event where that doesn't have a large amount of attendance, but we could limit attendee size to that as well if we want to make sure that things stay separated.
Well, I know the Fargo Marathon's been canceled.
As much as we would love it, our fun runs are much smaller than the marathons.
They're going to be able to maintain 6 feet apart the whole time, even in the lineup before they're ready to start and all this stuff? We
can work with the organizers to figure out if that's possible. But if that's up to you guys as well. If you think that's something that can't happen, we'll follow that direction.
Go ahead, Commissioner George.
Okay. I was just going to say, first of all, I appreciate how you started off, because I know we had voted last time to move this over to West Fargo events, so I was kind of wondering about that, so I appreciate you mentioning that. Although I don't like seeing any cancellations, I am very open to compromise, and I'd rather see us making arrangements to be more COVID-friendly and still be able to have an event to some capacity. The ball fields are right in my backyard. They have games all the time, and people are able to social distance just fine. I've participated in numerous fun runs and small ones. There wouldn't be any issue with distancing either. So I like what you have proposed. I think it's a good compromise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else?
I just want to make...
Questions? Commissioner Simmons.
I'm sorry, thank you, Mayor. I just want to make the comment because I see it on social media and they are right. Mandy, I agree with you on this one. We have to compromise. But I also want to make a comment clear that we're sitting here giving guidelines to these different events, and here we're sitting. We most certainly are not 6 feet apart. So we are somewhat hypocrites, and that's what they've been calling us. So it's like, we need to keep that in mind when we're sitting here making these decisions that, we're not in line either, folks. So come on, it's just a food for thought.
I'll just say, if my monitor wasn't bolted to the...
You would be there, I agree. I'd prefer you to be outside if you mind. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I'll let you vote on that separately.
That is a good point to tell the public. Our monitors are bolted down.
So we
can't move. So, which is probably a horrible reason why, but any other discussion with regard to the recommendation for the 2020 Westfest activities?
I think it's good. I'd make a motion to approve.
Commissioner JoDee moves that, we accept the proposal by Ms. Richards, regarding the 2020 West Fest activities. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner George seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve these recommendations as pointed out, by Ms. Richard. Keeping in mind, just so everybody up here understands, the West Fest parade is canceled.
And just what happens if we get a big spike just days before? Will you cancel everything, or what's gonna happen?
We could call a special session of the commission, executive session. If we have to deal with additional health issues within the community, we have that authority.
So what days are these planned for?
They would be planned for Friday, September 18th through Sunday, September 20th.
So if things change based on COVID and governor and CDC and all that stuff, this
We could call a meeting, your mayor,
whole
you're right.
meeting, then it could be,
I would have one question. Melissa, thank you for, to remind us again, how many people attend West Fest Days, so we get the numbers? Yes, so
Tens of
it's a whole
thousands,
different than even
yeah.
the cruise night that we're doing. It's
Yep,
a different ballgame. So
Yep, and
I want
it's,
people to know that.
in a normal year, we worry about the crowds on the streets during the parades and making sure it's safe for the children who are trying to get the candy, so this is just another, a layer
just
of...
too much.
Yep, it is. It's unfortunate, but, I know that our community is appreciative of what we can execute. We heard that loud and clear this weekend, and so I think they'll still rally and enjoy celebrating West Fargo in whatever way we can make happen.
So I have a motion. We haven't voted, have we?
No, we have a second, though.
Oh, we have a second. Okay. Any additional questions? We'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to you and your team for finding some activities that will fall in line with the protocols of the health folks. Thank you. Item number 5 is approve the final branding for the downtown mixed-use district. Again, Mrs. Richard.
Well, I'm excited to stand before you guys today and look towards the future and sunny days ahead, which, well, they're sunny now too, but even better. I am before you today to talk about the branding for the downtown mixed-use district in West Fargo. We kicked this branding project off last year when we received funds from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, from the Downtown Business Association, and through the City Commission's approval as well. We completed a study with AE2S and have been able to narrow it down to a final brand. The intention of this brand is to provide a name and an identity to our downtown area that has gone through excellent redevelopment. We wanted to find a brand that didn't compete with the Fargo's capture of downtown, that was authentic to the area, and also would be helpful for the DBA to enhance their activities. I am going to invite Andrea Bowe up now with AE2S. That's the agency that helped us with this, and she's going to walk you through the process of getting to this point, and what our final recommendation is. Because Commissioner George wasn't in her seat when this project kicked off, we did have a meeting with her last week to walk through it as well, so she was up to speed. But for everyone's benefit, we'll go through it again, and then we'll come back up to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Richard. Good evening, welcome.
Good evening, thanks for having me. So Melissa gave a little bit of the background. I'm gonna hop in the presentation here, if I can. There we go. Okay. I always like to start talking about what is brand, what is a community brand, because it's a little bit different than a product brand. It really is everything you think of when you think of the 5 senses. So it's more than just a logo, it's more than just a visual identity, it's who you are, it's your personality as a community, and it's got to appeal to all the 5 senses. And really, how do people experience your downtown or this area that we're going to be branding? I'll use this. When we started this process, we really looked at your comp plan, the West Fargo 2.0, it really had a lot of great data already in it. So we mined the data that was in that comp plan. We used the guiding principles that were already developed by the city of West Fargo. That really guided us through this whole process. And one thing they pointed out in this, in the comp plan was being authentic. And it's so important to be authentic as you develop your brand. And in order to be authentic, you really need to reach out to your community members, your residents, and also visitors to the area. And so that's what we really focused on. We wanted to make sure that in the discovery period of branding, we reached out digitally, we reached out in person. So we went to Westfest and Cruise Night, gathered information there. We had a number of focus groups as we went through the process, and we had additional surveys for city staff and also the DBA as we went through the process and kind of narrowed it down. And so this is the process we use. We call it the 3P process because the 3 Ps stand for people, personality, and place. And usually as you're mining the data, you're asking people to respond, what do you love about this place? What does it remind you of? How does it make you feel? It really falls into those 3 categories. And as we work through those 3 categories, we see those connectors and we start to develop themes. And so our team usually develops 30 to 40 themes as we work through this data. And through using focus groups and different surveys, and we like to narrow it down to about 10 possible themes. We start developing those a little bit more. We'll add some design to them and narrow them down even further to 2 or 3. And we took those 2 or 3 to the DBA as well to discuss which ones they liked, which one resonated with them, as well as the focus groups too. And as we went through this process, what we really saw is part of this, part of the area is really, it's a historic downtown. It's really the core of your city. And so there's this kind of throwback to history in Old Town and those sort of thoughts. And then on the other side, what we were hearing is, but there's a lot of redevelopment and there's a lot of newness happening too. And so we really had to think about how do we have a nod to that history, but also recognize that it's changing and developing. And so what became of that was the yards. And the yards refers to the stockyards, which is the history of West Fargo and kind of that area, but we dropped the stock off there, so it's the yards, and modernized it a little bit. So it's got a nod to history, but it's a little modern as well. And then as we worked through this with the DBA, they really felt that it was important that we highlight Sheyenne. It was the place that was missing from the yards. So it's called the Yards on Sheyenne, so that we're recognizing that place as well. And then once we had that, we wanted to make sure that we put together the entire guide. There's a style guide that we put together, which has the brand positioning, the core brand pillars, the tone of voice, all those type of things, so that as you prepare your marketing materials and promotions, it always has a consistent tone and feel to it, which is that welcoming, lively, connected community feel to it. So we want to have that tone. And the one thing I forgot to mention too, which is neat about the yards, is it really harkens to a backyard too. It's a gathering space. You have a lot of green space there. You have going to have events and people gather there. So it's kind of like coming to your backyard too. So it has a couple different meanings to it. And these are just a couple pictures of what it could look like. Placemaking will be important as we move forward with the brand. And so this was some examples of using it on banners, painting it on sidewalks or walls. And this is just some more of that, expressing the tone of it and let's gather at the yards and the type of supporting sub-messages that will be used in the advertising. So that is the yards.
Questions? Additional questions for the ladies? I have one. When you presented to the Downtown Business Association. What was their reaction? Was there a split vote on your final two options, or, you know, just a little bit about the dialogue with them?
There wasn't too much dialogue. I think people were accepting of this brand. There was one individual who liked the other brand proposition that was Uptown Cheyenne Commons a lot better, who expressed some thoughts and feelings on that, but it was mostly an acceptance of it. And then the executive committee shared that they felt they had approved it by not having any additional votes against, or it was an acceptance of the brand, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
Commissioner Simmons?
Melissa, I think at the meetings I was at least, and you were there, obviously, I think the commonality that we all had was Sheyenne.
Mm-hmm, yep.
And so the yards was Commissioner Jurgovic's.
Yep, and on Sheyenne
Nobody
is
can say
Commissioner
that,
Simmons.
but, yeah, so, but the Sheyenne part was everybody had the same. Somewhere in there, we needed Cheyenne Street, and I think it looks great. You did a great job, so.
Yep, AE2S did a great job, and if you've seen the brand standards, one of the things I really enjoy about this brand is it does feel authentic, it doesn't feel stuffy, it feels West Fargo, but the color palette to me is so lively and so indicative of what that area is like when there is an event, and that's when it really comes alive, so I'm very excited about the brand. Next steps is for my department to work with Lauren in economic development and work on implementing this brand through a website and Instagram and some little organic touches that we can put in now. We also have budget left over for AE2S to work on a toolkit for the DBA businesses to utilize to begin implementing the brand in their activities as well.
Just a quick
Commissioner
comment.
George?
Thank you. Yeah, just like I said in the meeting, just want to reiterate publicly that I really, really like this. I think you guys did a wonderful job. I love how it's original and unique to the area. I love that you have the throwback portion to the stockyards as well as the backyard component and being new and modern. The colors, everything, I love the whole thing. Great job. Thank you.
Your public input meetings were well done to AE2S. There was a lot of diversity and a lot of, with regard to the selection process and who liked what. And Uptown Commons was also a popular favorite, if you will. So, Commissioner.
Just one comment to explain, Commissioner Simmons. You know, I have for years cringed every time somebody says downtown West Fargo, because I don't think we own the word. Most of the time in this community, when you say downtown, people think of Fargo. So I'm a huge fan of you know, a unique name that's uniquely ours that we can start building and it's really meaningful to our community. And I think it's I'm a big fan, so I would love to make the motion to approve.
Commissioner Jurdovic moves. Is there a second, please? Second. Commissioner Olson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the branding for downtown mixed use to the yards on Sheyenne. Is there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you both very much for your work.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Item number 6, draft documents for proposed improvement for District 2257. Mr. Scott.
Good evening, and thank you, Commission President Dardis and members of the Commission. So tonight, got a few items actually that are relatively related to each other, and I'm going to lead off with this first item here, this proposed 2257, which I want to state is not, I'm not asking for an action tonight, but felt like this was very important to bring forward prior to, let's see, sorry about that, click that out, prior to taking any action on the next two items. The proposed corridor, and in your packet there's an engineer's report specifically on this 9th Street Northwest corridor. It is a very important north-south arterial roadway connecting Main Avenue to 12th Avenue. And along this corridor there's other regional transmission water mains and deep collection gravity sewer mains that are, play a big role in servicing our community with water and sewer. And the next two items on the agenda are going to be specifically projects for each of those utilities. And if I could have timed this a little better, I would have brought this particular report regarding the proposed 2257 sooner, partly because, again, the other projects are along or adjacent to this corridor, and at one time, a couple of years ago, we were originally starting to plan and game plan for a very large regional reconstruction project to tackle all three components: the sewer, the water, and then the street on its own. And when I say street, I also would include the stormwater infrastructure there. And so I'm not going to get into a long-winded overview of this concept report that's provided in your packet, but I do want to give a couple highlights. For starters, like you've seen in the last couple meetings, we've got a capital improvement plan cut sheet that's associated with this particular project. And in that capital improvement plan cut sheet, there's the purpose and need, a scope, a cost estimate. Now, one thing I'll get into this a little bit later, but the cost that you're seeing here, this $4.2 million, does not align with what we currently have in our CIP that was approved back in June. Our capital improvement plan back in June actually had a $7 million reconstruction project slated for this corridor. The boundary, again, Main Avenue approaching 12th. We don't need to quite get to 12th Avenue. A few years ago, we did realign a portion of this roadway right up from basically 12th to 8th Avenue. 8th Avenue here, if you're following my cursor. So we aren't quite going all the way up to 12th Avenue with this particular project. We're going to be just shy of 8th Avenue where we left off that project a few years ago. Another item I wanted to point out, back in July of 2018, the city did receive a petition from a handful of the businesses that operate out in this industrial area of West Fargo. A handful of them, as you can see here, they're noticeable names: Coast Materials, Wayne Transport, Excavating Inc., Farset Oil, and Northern Metal Recycling are a handful of property owners that operate their businesses out here. And as you can see in this picture that I'm circling here, there's been significant deterioration of the roadway, and they're basically asking the city to look to improve this corridor. So now getting into this draft report that's provided in your packet, this is not necessarily a full engineer's report at this point. We decided to title this a corridor concept report. Again, there's other projects that are branching out from this. As you can see further in this report, they include some of the sanitary sewer work that is needed out here and the water main work that's needed out here. As you'll find in each Appendix A is the sewer information, and Appendix B will be the water information. And so, again, tonight, not looking to take action, but just wanted to have this opportunity to explain kind of what's going on out here as we start to look at other projects as they move forward. Sometimes the question is, why aren't we doing everything all at once? And the nature of the improvements, again, as it's discussed in further detail here, is they really do lend an opportunity to leverage efficiencies and economies of scale by compartmentalizing the projects and getting bids on individual projects. The sewer is going to be a unique project that I'll touch on in the next agenda item. And then the water transmission line, which we do have funding from State Water Commission to construct, again, is just another unique type of improvement that, again, we just thought that it was, in this situation, better to try to separate these projects and go after higher efficiencies and economies of scale and try to save some money instead of doing maybe what we've done in traditional, similar to Cheyenne Street here, where you tackle everything all as one big project. So now, I alluded to earlier that the capital improvement plan that was approved back in June doesn't quite line up with the cut sheet that's in your packet here. Part of what's going on there is and I'm gonna actually just pull up a copy of our capital improvement plan here real quick. But what we had scheduled in our capital improvement plan, we did identify the sewer and the water projects as individual projects. So by the time we had approved the CIP, we did have that effort or that mindset already moving forward. But as far as the street component was really broken out into two different projects. The first one that was slated for 2020 this year was more of a rehabilitation project. Basically go in and mill off some of the pavement and do an overlay project just to buy some time. And we had, as you can see there, $550,000 scheduled for that. And then down in the 2024 timeframe is where we had this full reconstruction type scale project of $7 million. And as I will jump back to the corridor report that we're reviewing here, at least within that cut sheet is just the quickest way to view it. You can see that based on some of the investigations that we've been working on with more engineering, we're really looking at a $4.2 million street project. So if we were to move forward with something, I think some of where the recommendation is heading, and again, this isn't meant for action and or a final decision, but as you can see in the conclusion section of this corridor report, the recommendation is for an option B, to upgrade the road and the storm sewer infrastructure throughout the entire area. And I'm going to go where there's a map shown for that specific alternative. So again, this project area here, we're actually looking towards just moving forward with this $4.2 million project of full reconstruction. So again, wanted to take an opportunity, review from a high level all of the work that's being proposed out here. We're not moving forward with anything specifically on the roadway and storm sewer yet today, but wanted to at least have this concept report, invite some discussion on it, especially prior to taking action on the next two agenda items, which are going to be specifically the sewer project and then the water main project. So I guess with that, I'll pause and open up for questions.
Questions for Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Commissioner Olson?
Just curious, Dustin, why we're not going all the way up to 12th Avenue with the possible, unless, there's a reason why you're stopping where you are stopping there.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Olson. A few years ago, we actually did a project where we rebuilt and realigned County Road 19 from 12th Avenue down to 8th Avenue. And I'll see if I can get to a map here that better shows this.
Just lining them up, trying to line them up.
There's really not one there. Short of pulling up our GIS map, but you can see here that the road alignment actually used to come out, head kind of veered to the west here, followed the drain. Yeah. And a few years ago, we realigned that and reconstructed it from 12th Avenue just past 8th here. So where we're proposing to tie onto is that new section of concrete road.
Okay. One more question. You have your option A and option B, and you've got contingencies in there. For option A, it's 15%, but option B, it's 25%. So I'm wondering why there's such a big difference there. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I apologize, I didn't actually touch on the financial aspect of these options. And so, thank you again, Commissioner Olson. The engineer's estimate for option A, as you can see here, a total project cost of $700,000, and you're specifically asking a question on the construction portion here where they estimated a 15% contingency. And then I'm just going to zoom down to the engineer's estimate for the other option, option B here, where they've got a contingency of 25%. Before I directly answer that, I also want to point out there are the non-construction related components to this estimate. And Commissioner JoDee actually caught me before the meeting and asked the question on the legal and administrative fee of 5%. One thing I do want to point out, some of that certainly changes project to project. I will say that with this, there's some dependencies on whether or not we would even use something like the legal and admin. That's generally common for projects where we have special assessments, but in years past, we had, say, 10% factored in there. The last few years, we've used 3%. Now, as you can see here in this particular estimate, there's a 5%. When I go to the next projects, there's nothing showing there in terms of a percentage. Some of that stuff does fluctuate, and that is kind of similar to the contingencies based on what information and how the comfort level of the design is at the point of putting this estimate together will kind of dictate what we're using for contingencies. And so for option A, the nature of the work is a little more straightforward. We're a little more comfortable with it. We haven't, again, this isn't a full-blown engineer's report. We're looking at a concept, and so we haven't really dove into having a field survey done to analyze where are all the nooks and crannies, and so we're putting in a 15% contingency here, which is a little higher than what we would use if we had more information. We generally would use 10%. So again, this is more of a straightforward, smaller scale project. Now when we go to a larger scale project, where we're anticipating more of a full reconstruction, but again, we have not done full-on field survey work and a lot of engineering design work here, we're adding more contingencies in here, anticipating that as that work is done and we have a better idea of what is being planned, that those contingencies will continue to come down. So if I were to bring this forward at the time of approving plans and specs, for example, or even certainly when we do a full-blown engineer's report for this particular project, I would expect that these contingencies will be lowered, if that is making sense. Yep, thank you.
Commissioner George?
First of all, I appreciate Commissioner Olson pointing that out. I think that was a really good point to make. So I think everybody in here knows my general stance on special assessments, but this is the situation that I feel like is an exception. I appreciate that you have a list of businesses here that they're asking for this and they want this. So this would be a situation where I would actually support this project going forward with those businesses saying, hey, we want to be special assessed for this, we want this to happen. So I appreciate that aspect.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have two questions. You have a list of people that have petitioned the city? Okay. Commissioner Simmons has asked we take a break, so we stand recess for about 10 minutes.
Mr. Scott, I will. Thank you, Mayor, very much.
My pleasure. We'll reconvene the City Commission meeting. Again, this is the Monday, August 3rd, West Fargo City Commission meeting. And at this point in time, we will have a discussion on, is there any more discussion on 2257? Any more questions? It's a non-actionable item. There was a point, I think, Mr. Scott, you'd like to clarify something with Commissioner George, please.
Yes, thank you, Commission President Dardis. I did want to go back to Commissioner George's question about the assessments and the fact that we have 6 business owners or property owners here that have filed a petition for the improvements. We aren't here yet tonight in terms of creating an assessment district, but if and when we do, the assessment district would be a large district, and these particular businesses and property owners would be a minority. I don't know what the percentages would be, but typically with an arterial roadway, we would go, sometimes it's a mile each way, or sometimes we're bound by geographic things like the river or the railroad. So I don't know exactly the extent of this boundary even, but I thought it was certainly prudent to maybe double back to your point that you brought up and just let you know that these owners here are going to be in the minority if and when we do bring forward an improvement district.
Yeah, and then something the public didn't hear that I brought forth is if that was something we could do going forward, is contact the other businesses in that area and make sure that people are okay with that before we proceeded, since it is, pretty expensive that we're looking at.
Yeah, great point, Commissioner George. Yes. Again, if and when we proceed with the project, I think we would certainly go out and do some more outreach. By law, with the street improvement project, we would have to have a protest hearing, basically an opportunity for those within the district to protest out the creation of the assessment district. So, but even beyond that, I think we would certainly reach out to this area and have some public involvement before we move forward with the project.
We'll close that item now. Thank you, Dustin, for the upgrade. Moving on to item number 7 is to approve the engineer's report and authorize the engineer to prepare plans and specifications for projects 1316, Phase 1. Mr. Scott.
Thank you again, Commission President Dardis and members of the Commission. So here we have the what I would really consider to be probably our highest priority project that's identified in our capital improvement plan. And it is a portion of this corridor that we just briefly discussed here in the last item. This is for our trunk sanitary sewer line, our main gravity sewer that effectively serves all of West Fargo, unless there's anything that's a little downstream of this. You can see here we've got our capital improvement plan sheet, and in the map here, this red line work that you see here, there's a portion of this sewer. It's a 36-inch diameter sewer main. Part of it's running just north of Main here along Drain 21. There's also a significant size line, an 18 and a 24-inch pipe along the railroad tracks. And again, even south of the interstate, everything is being pumped effectively ends up in this large gravity sewer line. So being that it really takes a lot of flow, there's been some complications that we've noticed in the last few years where the manhole structures themselves, for example, are starting to rapidly deteriorate, partly due to just the high concentration of the sewer that's coming through this system. And some parts are worse than others. And so we are going to take a two-phase approach here. And as you see in the engineer's report, there are a couple options, but primarily what we want to move forward with a phase one is to try our best at rehabilitating what can be rehabilitated. And then also that'll give us an opportunity to start identifying specifically where certain replacement type work is needed, so on and so forth. And so really from a critical standpoint, you know, if we were to have an emergency on this system, for example, one of these manholes collapse, that really puts a very significant, most of the city at risk for dealing with sewer backup. Now, of course, Public Works would certainly get out here. We would have some emergency contingency plans in place to keep the sewer from backing all the way up into people's homes, but it's a risk that we certainly don't want to have on our shoulders, and so that's where we are moving forward with a project, or I'd like to move forward with at least a phase one project, which is to try some rehabilitation techniques on these structures. The other nice thing with getting a contract in place, just from a rehabilitation standpoint, is now we also would have a contractor available to us. We can put some requirements in this contract that says, you know, you need to have certain amount of equipment that can really address if one of these 40-foot deep structures were to fail. We have help on our side to go and, I guess, restore that area and make those corrections. So what you will see in here is, again, more of a traditional, this is now a full-blown engineer's report. One thing I do want to point out right away, as I'm getting to this cost estimate, this is not proposed to be a special assessment. In our capital improvement plan, I believe we had shown this as being funded with a sewer bond, but or a combination of sewer and sales tax. But I just wanted to stress that this is more of a regional sewer type project where we've historically tried to use sales tax or sewer funds to fund this, similar to what we did with our connection pipe over to Fargo. Was not funded through special assessments. So just going to highlight what you see here in gray is the project that was identified in our capital improvement plan that was approved back in June. And again, in here, city funds, 100%. Zero special assessments. So now back to the report. Now, in this particular case, even though we are at the engineer's report phase, we do have a little more information. We are still going to be heading into some unknown territory where we have not really taken a project like this on before, in terms of trying to rehabilitate these deep manholes. And not only is the construction a bit of a challenge, but as we go in and address any one of these locations, there's going to be certainly a challenge to keep the system active. We can't shut down this system. This isn't like a water main where we can go turn a couple valves, isolate this, turn it off, work for a couple days. We're going to be dealing with this flow. So there's some unique construction techniques that'll have to be applied here. And although we're going to have a good foot forward, I'd be more comfortable keeping a 15% contingency built into this engineering estimate, just as, again, it's more of a budget cautionary step. So, one thing I also want to point out in this estimate, this legal and administrative item here, generally, we don't charge ourselves an administrative fee to do our own projects. This is something a little more common with special assessment districts. So I guess for all intents and purposes, you know, that could be significantly reduced, as we would really only be paying what legal fees would come with this particular project, which I have no way to really guesstimate that. We generally pay for those services on an hourly basis. So again, just wanted to point out that this $164,000 line item here is probably just as well worth removed and replaced with maybe, you know, $10,000, $20,000 of legal fees. So again, a lot of information in this engineer's report. I think I'll pause here, maybe leave it on some of the existing condition photos that you can see within this report, and see where the commission has questions.
Commissioners, questions? Ms. George?
Thank you. Question on the sewer bond, as far as funding this. So, explain to me a little bit how that works. Is that we recently had the increase in sewer rates. Would that be money coming from that, or where would that money be coming from exactly?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner George. I might defer a question like that to Jim if you're, or Tina. Tina's available too, but
Mr. Jim Larson, Finance Director for the City of West Fargo.
President Dardis, Commissioners, yes, that would be coming directly from the sewer bond, and that is exactly the purpose of those increased fees. And you'll be seeing some other projects that our city engineer will be bringing forward over the next few months that'll be related to using those fees. And the plus about that is it's reducing the amount that needs to be special assessed. So, and it's a little bit more accurate that you're actually paying for the services you use by that versus how some of the assessments might come across.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Additional questions for Mr. Scott? Commissioner JoDee.
Yeah, Dustin, can you explain alternative 2 versus alternative 3 on the engineer's report? I'm a little confused as to which one we're talking about here.
oh, sure. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner JoDee. For that, I'm gonna dive up into. I should have done this before I concluded.
Because it looks like two estimates for the same phase, because they both say phase 1.
Correct. I'm not sure that's indicating that. So what I might do, Commissioner JoDee, is I might call upon Matthew Welly from Moore Engineering to step out of the audience and help me answer that. I do see, let's see, yeah, Matt, I don't know if you can come up and help explain that, but I know we had a couple of different options. They were both relating to phase 1. What's catching my eye too now for the first time is the fact that one says alternative 3 versus an alternative 2, and I would have expected one would have said alternative 1 versus alternative 2. So it has me kind of questioning that if I assembled the right documents within this packet, and that might have been, I might have got some things jostled when I put this agenda item together.
My quick view on it is it looks like alternative 2 ties to the cut sheet for phase 1 that you gave us, so that's why I'm just confused on what alternative 3 is.
Correct, and again, to be honest with you, you're kind of catching me off guard a little bit too with that question, because I don't recall the alternative 3, but I don't know, Matt, if you could elaborate that or not.
Before we go there, Commissioner Olson has a question.
Alternative 1 is a do nothing, if that helps you out. Alternative 1 is do nothing. So then you'd have your alternatives 2 and 3.
Well, I understand, I guess I understand the alternatives, but I'm just clarifying that what you're asking us to approve is what I think is alternative 2 in Appendix A. Is that, I guess that's maybe the better way of answering or asking the question.
Yes, and I would say that the request tonight would be in line with this alternative to selective rehabilitation and replacement. But if anything, I might just have to table this item and just make sure I've got that straight before we take action on that. Again, unless Matt, you could specifically.
Mr. Matt Welly, consulting engineer with Moore Engineering for the City of West Fargo.
Good evening, Commissioners. I did not write the report, but if I recall correctly, the alternative 3, I'm going to buzz to it to make sure I'm looking at the correct thing, was mostly a replacement. So without going into a phase 1 and analyzing to see which one should be rehabbed, you kind of take the more cautious approach and just reconstruct them so that they don't fail, kind of removing that risk, and that's kind of why we're recommending that alternative 2, to start with phase 1, rehab them, and then go into phase 2.
So that, I guess, brings up a different question. If we took alternative 3, is there then no phase 2 to the project?
Correct.
Correct.
Because that saves over 20% of the project cost based off of those estimates, if that's the approach that was taken.
So this was a little bit challenging with the cost estimating. The phase 2, the way we kind of looked at it was phase 1 was rehab, kind of thinking a worst case scenario that we're going to rehab a lot of those,
Yep.
and then the phase 2 would be less. But the phase 2 we kind of wanted to leave as a kind of a contingency, if you will, to say that if there's a lot more that needed to be reconstructed, it's going to be closer to this if you reconstruct all of them, it's $4 million. So it's probably in that $3 to $4 million of reconstruction. So it's not totally apples and apples of our total cost.
Let me rephrase it to make sure I understand. So if we went with alternative 3, that's the whole enchilada for $4 million, I'm going to roughly say.
Right.
Or we take this approach where the first phase, which is listed as alternative 2, is a $2.5 million investment, and then we know there's going to be a second half of that project, but it's a question mark as to what it's going to cost.
Correct. And so in the conclusion, actually it's embedded in the report, here it is, we kind of said it's $1.5 to $3 million of a phase 2, but we don't totally know which structures, we don't know where that line is between rehab and reconstruction, so.
Yeah, I totally understand the variability in this one, because I realize we can't, I mean, it's
Right.
a complicated thing, and nobody wants our sewers to stop working.
Right.
So,
Someone else? Any other questions? I have a question. So, in your alternate 2, there's not been field inspections of all of the basins or all of the manholes? Because you have photos of some. Have they been physically inspected?
Do you want to elaborate what phase? Well, I can elaborate on phase 1. So what phase 1 would actually do as part of the bid package is we would have the contractor go out and actually blast the manholes, and there's a lot of loose material there, so the field inspection was looking at it with the camera. We just lowered a camera in, no physical, and then they'd actually get in, blast it, and then actually take a camera that can measure it with a thickness, and so then you'd be able to see how thick the actual structure is based off of what's remaining.
Is this a specialty contractor that does rehabilitation of these type
Yes.
things? That's their major, main line of work type thing? Is it a local contractor?
There's some local contractors that could kind of prime this, be the main prime contractor, that we're aware of. We've actually worked with them with this report a little bit, so they were engaged in the process, but there's some specialty work involved for sure, mainly with the bypass pumping is a big
very good.
factor.
Thank you.
I just have one.
Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you. Justin, are you comfortable with the numbers you're giving us tonight here? You sounded a little hesitant at first. I mean, are you comfortable with what you're showing us?
Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. Yes, where I got a little thrown off was, I think part of it is the order of which these documents are in here, so having an alternative 3 and then to an alternative 2, and I think that, again, was just my mistake in how I organized this. I do know that when ultimately I decided to bring this forward, the project that the component that I was recommending was really close to what we had identified in the capital improvement plan, that $2,250,000, and that's where this alternative 2, as you can see, the total cost is slightly higher than that. Again, part of that's relating to the fact that we've got $100,000 of legal and administration in here where that doesn't get charged to our side. We don't do that within these projects where they're not special assessed. So we may have some legal costs, but so yes, I'm comfortable moving forward with this. One item I do want to bring up, a couple of years ago, we did some rehabilitation in our main sewer lift stations, one on the north side up by the lagoons and then the other one down by the interstate. And at least for you, Commissioner Simmons, I know you were on the board at this time, we had a change order, a very significant change order, relating to the fact that the walls, when we started doing the work, the plans had said, we need to basically rehabilitate 6 inches of this concrete wall that's 40 feet deep. Well, when we started doing that work, that 6 inches turned into 12 to 18 inches in a hurry because it was just that much further deteriorated than the evidence had shown when we put the plans together. Again, we cameras and certain things to guesstimate, but I bring that up because this is a similar natured type project. We're going to do our best diligence to estimate this cost, but once we have the contractors in place and we're out there, we're doing our best, unknowns happen and things like, wow, we really thought this manhole only had an inch or 2 of degradation. It's severely gone. We need to replace it. And that's going to start to drive some potential cost changes, and that's why things like, let's do a 15% contingency. We haven't done a lot of these types of projects. We don't, this isn't like a greenfield development where we've done so many of them that the estimates are easier. So yes, I apologize for that long-winded answer, Commissioner Simmons, but I just wanted to also bring that backstory in with that previous lift station rehab project, and again, I am comfortable moving forward with this alternative 2.
Well, you got my point across. Basically, these are all rehab projects, and you don't know what you're going to run into compared to building something brand new. And we ran into them, I know, with that drill bit up on 12th Avenue. That was a huge issue as well. So we don't know what we're going to run into. So it'd be hard to guess at best at the 1.5 to 3 million, in that phase. So,
well,
Commissioner JoDee.
And I think that brings up the question, though, that might still be one that we need to answer, and that is, if I'm understanding this correctly, a 2-phased approach, phase 1 is going to cost $2.5 million, and phase 2 is going to be somewhere between $1.5 million and $3 million. Where if what this says is a single-phased approach to replace it all comes in at 3.9, we can remove the variability for less of a total investment. If you just, even if I take the low estimate of 1.5 onto the 2.5, I'm at 4.
Yeah.
So it seems like total replacement is, if what I'm looking at is correct, is a lower investment, and it removes the risk and variability from the project. Is that
the low
true?
end of phase 2 could be 0.
Okay.
It's not highly likely that it's 0. There's probably a handful of manholes that need to be replaced. Sorry, I should say that, Mike. Yeah. So that phase 2, there wasn't a whole lot of kind of estimating done with that because the phase 1 is so critical that I highly would recommend to go out there and really study these manholes before just replacing all of them, because I think you'd be potentially throwing some money away.
Okay. By
finding some of the good manholes that are just a couple of coatings and they'll be back to use. So.
And with those coatings, what's the life of that expectancy after that?
I'm not certain. There's new products out there, and I don't recall if, I know I could get that answer to you because I know our engineer looked into this greatly. My guess is it's that 50-year range, but I'd have to confirm.
I mean, I certainly understand the need to take on this project and to get moving on it because of the deterioration. I just want to make sure that we're making the best financial decision as to how we do it.
Yeah, and the focus of the report was kind of to really define what we wanted to do with this phase one. And so I'll apologize for kind of the confusion of tackling phase one and phase two and all of it kind of together, because that next step of field inspection was kind of very critical. So it's kind of hard to move beyond that.
Thanks, Matt, and Commissioner JoDee. One way to maybe look at this is, you know, the engineer's report is really, it's kind of twofold, and in this case, the real point of the engineer's report was to really have a good discussion and educate on what the issue is and what the, at least the thought process on how to correct or deal with the particular problem at hand. The cost estimate is somewhat secondary, and I just want to bring up the capital improvement plan is where we kind of already dealt with some of the budgetary standpoint of this. Now, again, every project comes forward and we want to address what is the budget concern. And I bring this up because both phase one and phase two are in the CIP. And again, it is going to be hit and miss, especially with this next phase. I think I don't want to confuse things here, but when we have a project that's funded with special assessments, there is more of a legal requirement on an engineer's report and an estimate, and the administrative process of a special assessment district is dependent upon that number. Whereas in here, being we're not funding it with special assessments, there is no obligation to bring forward an engineer's report with the cost estimate beyond, again, we are trying to be more transparent and we want to just keep ourselves in check. And I think in terms of that, keeping ourselves in check, comparing it to the capital improvement plan that was approved in June, I think we're in the realm of where we thought we would be. We're fine-tuning things, and I think the best approach with a project like this is to get in with, call it the cheapest phase, if you will, but it's more of an investigative phase where we can rehab and assess what is going on in here. So we're rehabbing, but we're also assessing. And that'll start to really shape then what this phase two project will look like. And you know, I'll say it could go as far as, wow, we really missed the ball here. We have $5 million worth of work to do. And it could go the opposite way and wow, you know, we really only had to rehab 8 structures and we got this done for $1.5 million and we don't even need a phase two. So in terms of the estimate itself, I'm comfortable moving forward with this, but again, I just want to point out that this is a different scenario than if it were a special assessment district where we would have some legal obligations administratively to stay within certain arenas. Thank you.
Additional questions?
I'll make the motion to approve the report.
Commissioner Olson moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner JoDee. It's been moved and seconded to approve the engineer's report, authorize the engineer to prepare plans and specifications for project 1316. Is there any, phase one, is there any further discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Moving on to item number 8 is the approve the engineer's report, authorize the engineer to prepare plans and specifications for project number 1327.
Thank you again, Commissioner President Dardis and members of the Commission. So now moving into the water utility, again, following in suit with the last 2 items, this is in the same corridor or in the same vicinity. As you can tell by the project location map, we do, with this particular project, we do have State Water Commission funding. And it's a similar grant that we've utilized in the past with our large regional water transmission lines. And so on this first sheet of the capital improvement cut sheet here, you can see, we've got a $594,000 grant from the State Water Commission. So, and again, we are not proposing to finance this with special assessments. So, the local share, the just over $600,000 would be funded through either water revenue. Water revenue is what we've got listed in our capital improvement plan. Of course, there is always the option of capital improvement sales tax, but again, for now, as it sits in our capital improvement plan, that we've identified water revenue to fund the local share of this project. Really, what the need here, part of it is the increasing demand in this industrial area has prompted us to pursue grants for other projects, like the transmission line that we just put past the fairgrounds, went south of the interstate, to really have a good loop network providing enough water to the area that's demanding it, as well as make sure we have adequate fire flow, flows for fire protection, and so on and so forth. So what we have in the agenda tonight is, again, an engineer's estimate relating to the improvement project here. This one is much less, well, one, it should be less confusing, but it's also less complicated in terms of being able to identify what needs to happen and projecting out these costs. And so one thing that's been kind of taking a little longer is the land acquisition component of this. We are working with various entities to acquire the easements that we need to build this project. As you can see again in your packet, the engineer's report is showing a couple of these locations. One of them on the west side of County Road, or 9th Street Northwest. This particular property here that I'm hovering over is owned by Bush Ag, and we've been after an easement here with them for over a year now. We've had other projects where we've dealt with them, and it took quite some time to obtain the necessary easements. And so we are working with them, but it's slow going, and we might end up in a point where we would have to go through eminent domain to get this easement. And it is not a matter of money per se. It's they're just very slow to take action on anything. So. So now, zooming in on the engineering cost, I think a lot of the meat of the report and the type of improvement is pretty straightforward, so I'm going to skip a lot of that part of the report and just go right into the meat of the cost here. And again, there is this, like I mentioned with the last item, there's this legal and administrative line item. All we really would be focused on there are what attorney fees we would have with a project like this, which, when we are dealing with land acquisition, starts to add up a little bit. Overall here we've got a total project of $1.2 million. Again, contingencies, they don't have a percentage identified in here. Not off the top of my head, that is looking closer to be, I don't know if that's roughly 20%-ish. So again, we're probably high on the contingency side there. If that is making the commission uncomfortable, again, we can modify this. We don't, we could approve an engineer's report and modify some of these things if we so choose to. But I think, again, the nature of the project is more of what's important, and the fact that we did have this in our capital improvement plan, and I'm going to zoom to that location here. We did have a $1.2 million project identified in our capital improvement plan. So from that budget aspect, that passes that smell test. But again, if there are other components in here that we're concerned about, we can certainly go back and address those before we move forward. So again, we've got the $594,000 grant from the State Water Commission, and then the remaining portion, which equates to be about 40%, would be the local city portion that we are proposing to fund with water revenue. And if we needed another funding source, it would be sales tax. No special assessments on this one. So with that, I'll pause and...
Questions for Mr. Scott?
I'll make the motion to approve the engineer's report and authorize, Mr. Scott to prepare the plans and specifications.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner George seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the engineer's report, authorize the engineer to prepare plans and specifications for project number 1327. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is item number 9. Approve the engineer's report, authorize notice of order to construct sidewalks for Sidewalk Improvement District 6056. Mr. Scott.
And thank you once again, Commission President Dartis and members of the Commission. For this particular item, I may call upon our city attorney, Mr. Shockley, to help with some of the administrative type questions. One thing I want to lead off with the sidewalk project is the fact that there is a very specific and separate process for funding sidewalks in the Century Code. So it does not follow the same administrative process as as all of the other improvements that are funded with special assessments. So there might be some points in here where I would defer some questions to our attorney. Moving into our capital improvement sheet, the majority of what is triggering the need for a sidewalk improvement project are gaps in new and or even aging developed areas. So we might have a subdivision that has matured to a point of 80%, which, by the way, we do have an ordinance where once a development, or I think it reads, once a street is 80% developed, the city will move forward with installing sidewalks if the property owner elects not to. So that is really what's driving the need here. It's been since 2018 was the last time we did a sidewalk improvement. Historically, we've tried to do these every 2 years based on just the pace at which we've been developing and the pace of building construction. I will say there was a year back in 2016 where the bids came in too high and we did not proceed with that project. So we skipped a cycle in there. So that is always a potential factor with these types of projects. And it's also a reason why we generally wait until there's enough of the work to where we can get good competitive bids or get the bid interest. What happened in 2016 was partly a lack of interest because it was such a small project. So what you can see on the screen here is the project location map. The inventory staff within the engineering department actually started with the inventory. We then turned that over to more engineering, who's prepared this report and we are going to use to administrate and help us with this project. I know, again, it's a sidewalk. It's not really complicated in terms of engineering work, but even things like developing the plans and producing those, and a lot of the construction administration and project administration is at a point where our staff internally still can't get a project like this done. However, we have had internal conversations that our wish would be to get to that staffing level where a project like this can certainly be done internally, and hopefully for the next cycle then we would be set up to do so. So again, gaps, here you see the pictures of some examples. This on the right side is in Goldenwood, which is one of our further north, actually our furthest north residential development. And off to the left here is in Brooks Harbor. So again, it's just an example of what we're doing with a project like this. Now, to take a step back into this administrative process, what we do is we notify property owners that that the city is moving forward with an improvement, and we give them time to either install the sidewalk themselves, or they can option into having the city install that sidewalk, and then that cost is tracked and special assessed against that property. And we actually in a very detailed manner, track each cost per lot. So some lots need a little more boulevard grading or seeding or just a little extensive work. Some lots are obviously longer than others, so, the work is tracked and assessed to that particular lot. It's not one where we take a whole, the entire cost and just divvy it up, you know, to everybody, so. And some of that is laid out in Moore Engineering's report here, and I think I'll save some of the other, if there's still questions on administratively, that procedure, I'll wait till the end here, and again, I might refer to Mr. Shockley. One thing I want to point out is an estimated schedule. If we get authorization to proceed tonight, what we would need to do then is get the notifications out, and I would like to do that immediately so that if there are property owners that want to build the sidewalk themselves, they could do that this fall. We would give them, you know, the remainder of the fall to get that work done, and then come spring, in the meantime, we would collect an inventory of who did install sidewalks, open bids in the wintertime, and then move forward with the spring construction. So, getting into the appendix here, what we start with then is a list, and it's that map that I showed you. There's an inventory or a list here that's prepared, and this is where we start with. We notify everybody on this list. Now, after we go back and we've given people a few months to build their own, we will revise this list and then move forward with a final project to be bid. And then there's a whole other process at the end before we were to go through these special assessments. What you have towards the end of your packet is just an example of what this notice looks like. It's per century code, it's called the Notice of Order to Construct Sidewalks. It lays out, here are the legal lot and block of a subdivision, and it says that, you know, they're noticed to construct a sidewalk per our ordinances and century code, and we give them a time frame, and again, once we get through that process, we will then move forward with the bids, which segues into, again, the discussion on the estimate. How can we truly know what the final cost is if we don't have the final list of what sidewalks we're building, and we don't? This estimate here is going to be based upon the list that we show, but if 20% of that list is reduced, then this cost estimate is going to be reduced accordingly. Along with filling the gaps, we also take the opportunity to go through if there's any city-type work that needs to get done. For example, in 2018, I think we had some rehabilitation of the 13th Avenue bike path or the Ninth Street bike path, but it's an opportunity to deal with some of our own maintenance wear and tear on some of our sidewalks and or paths, which then is financed through our capital improvement sales tax fund or our street fund. But that component is not funded through the special assessments. And also noted in the report, there is historically been some cooperation with the West Fargo Park District in facilitating some of their needs within this particular project, but they would be, again, treated like the other property owners, where we would track their costs and charge it back to them. So, with that, I will pause and ask for any questions.
Commissioners? Commissioner JoDee.
So, Dustin, why in the schedule that shows the amounts by property owner, if I take any of them, the construction totals vary by almost every lot, which I would expect. Some probably have more sidewalk that need to be poured. But why is the engineering and contingencies amount the same for everybody when our engineering fee is typically based off of a percentage of the total? Shouldn't there be variability in that if we're proportionately handing that out based off of the amount of sidewalk that somebody has?
Thank you, Commissioner JoDee. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question. I'll repeat it back. The way I kind of heard it was, we track the individual construction costs, but then the engineering and stuff is...
Let me give you an example. If you go
Sure.
to the very first page of the chart that shows the amounts.
Right here.
There you go.
Yeah, and take the second and third line item there. So we're talking
Okay.
about Lot 5, Block 3, and Block 2 of Brooks Harbor 6th edition. The construction total for one of those lots is, we'll say $4,700. The construction total for the next one is $1,500, roughly a third of the neighboring property. I would assume that if our engineering fee is based off of, for example, 11% of the construction total, that the person that has the $4,700 bill would be paying more for engineering and contingencies, because those things are proportionate to the work that needs to be done. So it seems weird to me that those other amounts are identical.
Yeah, got it. Thank you, Commissioner JoDee. So as far as there are some other ways to do this. In terms of preparing this first estimate, it was almost just easier administratively to redistribute the non-construction related costs equally among everybody. There are instances where even though a particular lot might only have, say, 40 feet of sidewalk and a different lot has 80 feet of sidewalk, the lot that had 40 feet might have taken a lot more administrative effort on it. And maybe it's not necessarily the design that took more, but the construction management component maybe took more. And that's where it gets to be very difficult now to track on all of these properties exactly the hours and time spent administrating it. So the construction might vary, but I would say it's not a linear relationship when you compare that to the engineering and construction administration and or even the legal administration that goes into getting this project done, if that's making sense. And so when we do get to the end of this project and we have the final, okay, here is, we know the final engineering bills, we know the final everything. We could look at it as do we redistribute these non-construction related items on a proportionate scale? But again, my fear there is that you've lost you might have had one lot again that just took up a lot of time dealing with administrating that work. And it might not be justified to say that they should have less of an engineering administrative fee than the other project that maybe had twice the amount of construction value done, but maybe took a lot less administration.
Okay.
So to play it safe, we just, historically we have taken these non-construction items and just redistributed it evenly amongst all the properties involved.
Commissioner JoDee not only asked my question, but he used the same two line items for my example. So, Mr. Scott, I got to tell you, in all of this fine work that you're doing, and the preliminary opinions of cost and things like that, I'm going to tell you that we're going to continue to struggle every commission meeting with these contingencies and how those costs are being applied. Particularly when some of them, when you have an estimate, they're at 40% or some are at 20% or 20, if you're up here doing math like I am, and I understand each project is different and there are different challenges, if you will, and the like. But for anyone that's in the profession of estimating, which I only did for 43 years of my life, I never once was allowed a contingency.
Absolutely.
You did your field work, you understood what the status of the project was, and you bid it. And if you get slapped in the face because you didn't do your field work, then that's the way it was. So I've got to tell you, commissioners, as we sit here, I love all the things that you're doing and the projects that you're bringing forward, but these contingencies running at 40%, I'm not going to vote for them. Okay, anybody else? Ms. George.
So a couple things. First off, again, I feel like this is a special assessment type exception for me, being that you're giving people ample time to do their own sidewalks and they have that choice. I like that they have that option, but hey, they choose not to do it, then they're going to pay the special, because you buy a new house, you got to put the sidewalk in, right? So my question then would be, historically, do many people choose to do it themselves? And let's say 50% of the people did, which I'm gonna guess that probably wouldn't be the case, but if they did, would that affect the engineering and contingency costs?
Great question, Commissioner George. Yes, I couldn't tell you exactly historically how it does pan out in terms of, you know, do 20% of the people install them or not, but I will say that yes, people will opt to install their own sidewalk, and that will directly impact this cost estimate. With such a large quantity, it's actually been, I don't know that I could think of a sidewalk district where we had such a large quantity like this. I'm sure there's been in the past, but the last few that I've been involved with have been smaller, and so, you know, instead of having what we started with, a list of 40 and maybe 10 or so built their own. I'm not sure if that'll...
And then in that case, if a fairly significant portion chose to do that, would we have to revisit this with new numbers then?
Again, great question, Commissioner George. I think what we would do, once we go through this administrative process to put out the notice and then re-inventory those that are opting to construct, we will come back before the commission with a amended engineer's report. I'm not as familiar with the sidewalk process, but I don't think this estimate today is actually required necessarily from the legal administrative process, but I will say that before we go out to bids, it would be prudent to bring back a revised estimate so that the commission knows exactly what we're moving forward with before we do get those bids. And at that time, we can certainly address issues like the contingencies.
I just have one comment, Mayor. I'm looking at one down on lot 24, the Wild 7. The construction cost is $1,000, and the engineering contingency is $1,900. If I was that owner, I would be a little put out, because I'm being charged more for engineering and possible contingencies than what the cost to put the sidewalk in is. And I understand there's gotta be some engineering, but it's, like you said, it's probably a 3 or 4 foot wide sidewalk, a couple inches thick. Shouldn't be too tough to engineer that. And to me, it should be based on the amount of footage versus just a flat rate for everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson, and I certainly welcome a different approach to distributing these non-construction costs. Again, I'd probably just caution that what might seem like the cheapest amount of work to do sometimes can take administratively much longer than, so just by comparison, there might be just a very cookie cutter 80-foot stretch of sidewalk that needs to be done that totals $10,000. And in a different development, there's a very complicated 20-piece section of sidewalk that ends up, we have to go facilitate utility relocations or additional grading and site restoration. At any rate, there could take additional construction management time, and that's where I think some of the terminologies within these estimates also have to get revised. And it's not just about the design work, because again, you know, the design of a sidewalk don't need much of it. To administrate a project like this takes time and effort, and takes bodies out there, and it can happen with even the $1,000 worth of work could take a lot of administrative construction time to be out there and messing around with it. So, but again, I welcome if we want to, certainly prior to putting the final list of assessments together, we can certainly have that discussion on what do we do with these non-construction related costs, and it wouldn't take, we can write a quick equation here to redistribute this based on the percentage of construction on each lot. Absolutely.
Commissioner Simmons.
I guess, you know, looking at this, and Commissioner Olson is kind of right. If I were the homeowner, I'd just do it myself and say, okay, I'll meet your specifications, and then, of course, all I have to pay is what it costs for, you know, the company to do it. There are no engineering contingencies on that, right?
Correct. And
so we're telling everybody out there, do your own and get them done, and then we pretty much don't have to worry about
I've heard it's like half to do your own typically.
Yeah.
So am I to the understanding that when, in some of these subdivisions, where they haven't built in, that's why there's gaps? Because you don't want contractors driving over sidewalks when they're, you know, you're gonna start pouring concrete and excavating and all that. So, you know, you have one there at Goldenwood, you know, that's my assumption, is that lot has not sold yet. So we go and put a sidewalk in and a contractor comes and destroys it, then you gotta follow up and administer the fact that they gotta repair or replace the sidewalk?
Thank you, Commissioner President Dardis. First point is spot on. Yes, predominantly these are lots that have not been built upon. We wouldn't issue a certificate of occupancy without a sidewalk. So all of these gap lots are gonna be lots that have not been built upon now. Majority of them are probably owned by the developer still. Some cases where there's either someone waiting to build and they own, or a third-party contractor has bought some of these lots, but very correct though that generally contractors don't want this sidewalk in place before they build the home, and that is predominantly why we don't include them with our improvements when we install them. But within our own ordinances, there is a requirement that once a street is 80% established, to facilitate these sidewalks getting in, because we start and we're dealing with a pretty strong complaint right now in Burlington, where there's a couple owners that are just upset that there has been a gap for so long. And so that's where we'll give that builder the opportunity to build. And that's just, I'm using that as an example. That's predominantly what's going on everywhere here. And so they'll have their opportunity, they can see this list, they can say, well, it's not worth it for whatever engineering fee. I don't need to pay any engineering fee because I can walk in tomorrow without an engineer and get a permit to put this thing in.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I kind of think though, maybe I won't speak for the mayor, but I'm thinking where I'm coming from here is most of these again are developers, so, correct? Most of our developers, so you're gonna make them put a sidewalk in, and they know when they build their house, they're gonna damage the sidewalk, there's no way they're not. So now they're gonna have to replace it, so I guess if I were them, I guess I would not wanna put it in either, I don't blame them, but I think maybe we have to actually look at our ordinance and perhaps change that or something, if that's what we're talking about here in reference to saying they don't, change the 80%. I know that's the law, that's in our ordinance, but otherwise, yeah, they're all technically right now, they're forced to, if they're over 80%, they're forced to put them in, and they're gonna be forced to redo them again when they crack and drive over them.
Well, I was trying to make a point. I am aware of the 80% of the development, and, that the sidewalks be put in. I understand that. I was just trying to make a point that if they're all gonna be damaged. There's no way that you're gonna drive an excavator over that without damaging the sidewalk. That being said, it's a tough one. But at the same time, the existing property owners that have built in there and that's their family residence, I can understand their displeasure of not having continuous sidewalks for their children to ride their bikes on and all that type of thing. So it's a tough one.
Well, and Commissioners, if I may, though it is an additional challenge for the contractors, they do have methods by which they can protect this stuff. It's called, they can bridge it, they can put material over it to where they can make sure it's not damaged. In the past, that's what they will do, and there are improvement projects where we do put in a sidewalk in with the city's projects. So it's not as efficient for them to take such care in and around the sidewalk, but believe me, they'll try their best not to damage it. And I have yet to really deal with a lot of complaints when we've gone through this process with a sidewalk project like this, complaints from that contractor community that says, you made me put this in and now I've got to replace it because I've damaged it. I would say the complaints we get are from the neighborhoods demanding that, these gaps get filled. So if that helps.
Makes sense. I'll make a motion to approve.
Commissioner JoDee makes the motion to approve. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Olson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the engineer's report, authorize notice of order to construct sidewalks for the Sidewalk Improvement District number 6056. Is there any further discussion?
I have one question.
Commissioner Olson.
When we're looking at this, what kind of time frame are we looking at to getting these completed?
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Olson. I will go right back to that schedule I had up earlier. So what we're planning to do is get the notifications out as soon as we can so that we can give ample time, pretty much the entire fall, for those that choose to build their own. And then we'll come back at this winter, re-inventory who decided to build, who didn't. And from that information, we will then put the final plans and specifications together and move forward with hopefully early summer construction.
Okay, thank you.
We have a motion on the table to approve the engineer's report and the Sidewalk Improvement District 6056. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Item number 10 is to approve the first reading of Ordinance 1162 regarding the mobility impaired parking. Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Commission President. This is a very simple ordinance change. As we received notification from the League of North Dakota Cities regarding a new funding designation for when people park in handicap spaces where the funds will be distributed to. As we were going through looking at the ordinances, we found two sections that were duplications. And so the ordinance before you eliminates 131609, which in essence was, it's a violation of park in a handicap parking spot. And then it modifies section 131623 to provide that the fees collected from the illegal parking would now go to the North Dakota State Rehabilitation Council instead of a local council, which no longer exists. So pretty straightforward change. It's the first reading. I can answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Any questions for Mr. Shockley?
I'll make a motion to put it on second reading.
Commissioner Simmons moves to approve the first reading of Ordinance 1162 regarding the mobility impaired parking and move it on to second reading. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner JoDee seconds. It's been moved and seconded to approve the first reading of Ordinance 1162 regarding the mobility impaired parking. Is there any further discussion? We'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 12 is review and approve the naming rights agreement of the POW MIA Plaza. I'm sorry, somebody waving at me?
Nope, you're right.
The preliminary budget.
Okay.
We thought we were...
Page 2, Commissioner Simmons. Review and approve the naming rights agreement of the POW MIA Plaza.
That was me. I apologize. I was mixed up. I forgot we changed it.
Everybody's still trying to stop me up here. What am I doing wrong?
Nothing.
The budget was next.
Should be the budget.
Budget,
The
Yeah.
budget should be next.
Supposed to be on the budget.
item 11.
I don't
Page
know
one.
how that got goofy.
Aha!
That's what I was waving at Jim. Do you have my copy?
Okay. Nice try, guys. My apologies. A preliminary of the 2021 budget presentation by Mrs. Fisk and Mr. Larson.
Thank you, President Dardis and Commissioners. I'm proud to bring before you the budget for the 2021 year. It has taken a lot of hard work by staff. They have done a fantastic job, and I want to thank them for all their hard work. I also want to thank Jim, the finance team, and the communications talent of Melissa for helping pull all this together. To start out, for the 2021 budget, you'll notice that expenses from 2020 are estimated to rise at just over $1 million, and that's after the cuts that we have made. And that is just in the general fund. I'm talking about that as the general fund. If you were to use our mill levy value, that would require an increase just for the general fund of 5.4 mils to adequately fund recurring expenditures in the tax levied fund. This does not cover the deficits that were created from underfunding in 2018, 19, and 20, as will be discussed later.
Tina, I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for a minute? I have absolutely no information. I can't download it on my thing, so does anybody have a copy of it that I can look at? Thank you.
I can move over a little, you can look at mine.
He's gonna bring me, Jim had told me he's got a copy.
We did not have enough copies to give one to everyone up at the, up on the dais, so I
Just
had
can't
requested
download.
that Jim did not, so I apologize. Okay, so, as I was saying, when we were working on the budget last year, we were hoping for a 2 mil increase for this particular year in our planning process, but in meetings with commissioners, we were, encouraged to, very strongly, to work on a 0 levy increase, and so in order to move forward, that is what we are bringing to you today. The 2021 preliminary budget has been adjusted for changes in interest rates and state revenues due to the coronavirus pandemic. Those two items, actually what we've done is, since they will bounce back and they will not be a recurring loss, we are requesting to cover those with general fund reserves due to the fact that, as I said, they will recover and rebound. That our normal process for general fund reserves, for those that are new and don't know, is that the general fund reserves are meant to be there for disruptions of government operations, revenues, when they drop unexpectedly but will rebound. Expenses that are only one-time recurring, they aren't recurring expenses. So you don't fund staff, you don't fund, insurance costs that will come over and over. The concern is that we need to have adequate revenues on reserve at all times for emergencies and for general well-being of the city of West Fargo. The concern is that the ongoing use of general fund reserves in order to try and artificially keep the mill levy down is going to come back and cause issues with the city of West Fargo. That's our concern. Now, you guys are in charge of all this, so what you choose to do is fine. The concern I have is similar to our sewer rate. If we don't manage our finances properly, we're going to have a spike. So that's just something I want to have you keep in mind. If you look back historically, from 2019 to 20, there were reductions. We had we deficit spent.
Mrs. Fisk, excuse me, Mr. Simmons has a question.
Tina, I don't have a question, I just want to make a comment. If you're going to stand up there and criticize us for doing what we did to bring it down to 0, then I would suggest that you bring all this back to the table and cut 2 employees, not hire 2, because to me, that's the answer here. So if you're going to criticize us, it's going to come back at you, okay?
Thank you very much, Commissioner Simmons. I'm not criticizing, I'm just laying the stage for what I feel is fiscally responsible for the community of West Fargo yesterday, today, and going forward, and that's my job, your job is to make the decisions, my job is to give you the information, so I'm trying to give you all the information so you could make your decisions the way you would like to make them. What we did during the 2021 budget process was there were 19 staff requests at just under $1.6 million. That was reduced to 9 new staff at a cost of $834,000, but that was across all funds, including enterprise funds. And so that doesn't include just tax levied funds. We were able to also, by staggering start dates, save an additional $400,000 for the 2021 budget. Cost of living was reduced from 2.5 to 1%, which is more in keeping with where things are at right now. And that was an additional savings of $233,000 across all funds. Equipment requests were reduced by $780,000. Of that, $521,000 was in the general fund line items. Education and training budgets were cut to take out travel and hotel room, and a small discretionary fund was left in the general fund in order to allow, if there's a big change, if someone needs to have a training and they don't have enough funds, they can make that discretionary request from the city administrator. Overall, when all was said and done, we had a reduction of $2.1 million to our budget. Some of those items are temporary, will need to reappear in the future, but others we have been able to cover with general fund reserves because they will rebound. back as revenues. Again, I would like to publicly recommend the City Commission of West Fargo considers in the future a policy of incremental increases of tax mill levy each year to keep up with costs of business and avoiding large increases in the future. A huge thing that came through on our Moody's report was that we have a strong outlook because we were actually upgraded, and that's because we have strong reserves and a good financial fiscal policy that we're working forward on, and that's something that West Fargo's always had and very proud of. So, Jim will now get up here and talk to you about the details of the budget, and the budget that he is bringing forward is, again, as I said, the zero levy increase. Thank you.
Mr. Jim Larson, Director of Finance for the City of West Fargo. Welcome.
Thank you, President Dardis and Commissioners. Just a real quick recap on how the process works. We actually began back in February of each year. And what we do at that time is we try to put the major rocks or large assumptions that need to be dealt with up front. For example, what are we going to start with for a mill levy increase? 0, 2, or a reduction? We also need to take a look at the cost of living. We like to set that early so that we have a target. That's a major expense in the city of West Fargo, so we need to know where that is up front. And that this year we started at 2.5%, we've reduced it down to 1%. We also need to take a look at major changes within it, things that might be impacting our budget, some other things. One of the items that we did this year at the request of the director is we took the departments of planning and building inspections and we combined them into a single department. That allows for the director to have better management of their finances at their request, and we're able to accommodate that. But it's good to have that information up front as we go through it. The next step as we go through it is we actually distribute it out to all the directors so that they put the input in. We don't preset their budget. They put it together, and then we work off of their inputs. Once we receive all the inputs from the directors and other areas within the city, Finance will then compile it. We're fortunate we have a good staff. I'm very fortunate to have good finance members, and we do compile the information and the numbers, and we see where we are. We have to make projections on revenues and other impacts to our budget. At that time, most of the case, and just about always, we're at a negative. So we realize that we have to make reductions, and we do that, and our city administrator, Mrs. Fisk, has already identified some of those larger ones that we made. After it's compiled and reviewed, it does go back to the directors for their input and, again, some additional review on their part, and sometimes they have additions. There's things that they've missed, and there's things that they also will reduce at that time. And so then we bring it back, we recompile it, and we start a review with the city administrator. And at that time, we refine additional information with it. We do have input from directors, other areas of the city. And then we have what we consider a very rough draft of the preliminary budget. And that's brought forward then for review with the city commissioners. We do review that with all the city commissioners, and that is either 2 or less at a time. So we do not have public meetings. Our legal counsel does appreciate that we don't have that happening. With the input from the commissioners, we then work with adjustments to that, and then that's basically the budget that we bring before you. This is the preliminary budget. So what is being asked tonight is that you consider approving this, but it is not finalizing. This does not set the budget. It only puts it out there so it's in preliminary form so we can submit to the county. The second part of the request that we have is also that you would set the hearing date, because included in the submission of our budget to the county is we also have to provide the hearing date for when our budget will be heard. At this time, we're asking you to consider September 8th, which is a meeting of the commission. There will be some other activity later that will move it from the 7th to the 8th, because that is Labor Day. And so the 8th is what we're asking. By state law, we must have that budget hearing cannot occur any earlier than September 7th, and so we've requested to use that first meeting. The commission could choose to not approve the final or finalize the budget at that point and then take it up in the second meeting. But we do need to have it approved prior to October 10th for it to be submitted to county. If the budget is not approved to be brought forward, then our mills will be set to what they were last year. So we will then basically have to fit to whatever last year's budget was. The other component is that if it is approved tonight, you can reduce it afterwards. You cannot increase it. So we'll max our expenses. Right now, our maximum for expenses and transfers is $88,535,232. It's actually a 3% reduction from prior year, but I will tell you that reduction is not from a reduction of expenses, it's the reduction of transfers that we did last year. So, as it was pointed out, we have about $1 million increase in our budget. So we want to be very transparent. So currently our budget is zero increase, but that came through the process of increasing fire by 1 mil and library by 1 mil. The reason we did that is our fire department is growing and we're providing services to our city. We anticipate that will probably need some additional mills in the future, but Chief Fuller did choose to not add, or he requested 3 additional staff, but then reduced them through discussion. The mills for the library are restoring mills that were removed in prior years, and again, we need to keep that, and if we don't increase mills for them or keep them the same minimally, they lose about 30-some thousand a year in state aid. So we want to make sure we restore that the best we can. But we did reduce the general fund by 1.93 mils. I also will point out that if you read on page 4, I have budget points laid out, and I have an error in there. It says the preliminary budget has an increase of 0.93 mils. That's in error. That's 0. Everything else is 0. We did not remove the narrative correctly, so I apologize for that. We've had a lot of impacts, COVID-19, and city administrator has already covered all the changes on that. There's one part of our budget, though, that we have budgeted an increase of $1.50 per month for forestry. Currently, our forestry fund is upside down. In other words, we're spending more than we're bringing in. We believe it would be a positive move to bring that up to $2 a month instead of 50 cents. That is in the budget, but that does not mean the fee is approved. We'll bring that back in a separate action, and if the commission chose to not approve it, we'd plan accordingly. So we don't want you to have that we're trying to force that fee, but we do believe it's prudent for that operation. We have 9 positions in this budget. Seems like a lot, but some of them are very straightforward. The operations manager is for our utilities. We had this position prior, it was cut, and we believe that we need to restore it based on the recommendation of our Public Works Director, and that position is to start January 1st. The other one is an equipment operator. We continue to add miles, and we need to add staff to go with those miles of roads. And so we have an equipment operator also starting January 1st in the budget. The police officer we have a new school coming up, so we need to hire a new SRO and school resource officer, and that is included in the budget, and that's a January 1st add. We have an assistant city administrator in the budget, and that's been requested by commission directors and our city administrator, so we believe it's prudent, and that one is set to come up March 1st. We have an engineering technician 3. Again, our engineering department continues to grow and have a lot of needs. We also have some areas of need within our stormwater and some different things, and so there's been a request for that, and that's included for a start date of July 1st. In the librarian, we have a new director of the library, and she is pivoting and she's working hard to increase and enhance what we've had. We've had a great library, but she's going to take it farther and greater, and this new librarian position is to help that move. We have 2 electricians that are being added July 1st and August 1st. We did a study a while back, and we're generally paying about $120 an hour for electrician. And with these positions, we were able to reduce expense at the same amount of ad. We reduced repair expense in our streetlights. So even though it's an ad, we did a reduction of expense to offset these. We have a safety coordinator for human resources with a start date of August 1st. This position's been requested over a number of years, and it's always been removed. This year we're asking to include it. Right now our workforce safety insurance has a high premium on it because of our safety. We need to coordinate better. We need a stronger safety program, we believe. And not only will it help us save money, we also believe it'll help our environment for our employees and our community to have that safety coordinator position. It's a very common position for communities of our size and the exposures we have, whether it's within our emergency services or our public works. I will say it probably isn't gonna be too heavy on the paper cuts in the finance department, but we could always appreciate a little help there too. We have a cost of living of 1%. We do look at CPI, Consumer Price Index, and pick your month. You can get a 1.5%, you can get a 0.5%. It's been all over the board with the COVID, so it's been very hard to get our arms around it. Our health insurance benefit cost, we increased by 12%. We think it'll be going up at least that much. That's what it went up last year. In other communities, they've been looking at anywhere from a 10 to a 20+% increase. So we feel that we're reasonable at 12%. We also did go through it in reduced education, travel, mostly travel. The education part, we're going to be working into a new model for that where we do more in-house or web-based or Zoom meeting-based training. And so we removed a substantial amount of travel out of our budget. We anticipate that with the COVID, that travel will still be very limited, and so we budgeted accordingly. So there are some other things that happened within our budget this year. We're trying to do some change in our accounting. In the past, we've had expenses charged into funds that we didn't feel was the best approach, and it wasn't the best for our staff to be able to manage those areas. So we've changed how we handle cost allocations and transfers. So one of the reasons the transfers are down is because we're using a cost allocation where we incur the expense in a department, but then we allocate costs based on a detailed schedule to bring it back, and it's manageable and it's accountable. So that's the approach we've been using. But unfortunately, it causes difficulty in tracking the trending in our budget, because when you look at that and you see, I don't have that expense that I had last year because it's moved to another department. And we moved quite a few, but we did use a very detailed approach in tracking how those would come through, and we used an approach to be able to make sure that we didn't double count or we missed. We don't want either one. We need to have an accurate budget as we move forward. So with that, I'll pause or stop. But our request is the consideration of approval of the preliminary, which can be reduced still, and to set the budget hearing date for September 8th.
Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you. Jim, I have a question. The safety coordinator, the job description, is that, like, because it's HR, is that totally different from, like, what Glenda does and what Pierre does and whoever else throws out all these safety?
I believe it'll be different than Pierre because he's moved into the emergency management role pretty exclusively. It will change, yeah, because right now Glenda is handling some of that, but there is, and I don't want to speak for HR, but there is we need to do more, and it just isn't in her purview, and we also would like to take it out from inside. Instead of being in a department where they see it, we want it to be corporate or wall-to-wall within the city. And by moving it into HR, it has that. Well, we believe it has that opportunity.
So I guess what I'm asking is, what I don't like now is when we get 2 or 3 emails from different safety people saying basically the same thing. We should have a safety coordinator that does it, that takes total control of the city and has not coming from different people, because it gets confusing when we get those.
We agree.
Is that what this position is? Yes?
Yes. This position will handle safety for the entire
city, rather than coming like it does now. We get 2, 3 different people throwing stuff out. It's like, it's not right, I don't think, so, okay.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I have just a quick question for you, Jim. Within here, the budget that you've laid out here, I see that there's certain things budgeted for, like cruise night, West Fest, all that, but I don't see a line item for West Fargo events. Where does that fall into play here?
The West Fargo events is in a special fund, and so we don't have that listed out in detail. So that gets more in a global, and at this point, we are working to bring that into a break even. So that is not sitting in this as a number out there.
Will it at some point?
It will be there, but it will be, we're looking to have it as a break even.
But it has to be identified within here, does it not? Or am I thinking wrong? I mean, it's in a global place, so no one can see what we're spending or
It's actually, where it is in the Economic Development Fund. That's where the expense is, because that's right now is the fund that is carrying that, and it's carrying it out as a loan to the other special fund.
So when your final budget is done, will there be a footnote under Economic Development that delineates that information, Jim?
Yes, we will do that. We'll make sure that is done.
Okay. Commissioner George?
Okay, that brings up a few things. He brings up a couple of really, really good points, because I've gotten a ton of questions on that West Fargo events and how is that money being spent, and then even when we have events, the ticket sales, where does that money go? Because I guess I don't know either. So I think that's a really, really great point that I'd love to see addressed more too and seen in more detail. I also want to say I appreciate after the meeting that I had with you a couple of my concerns. The $2 million increase, I felt the timing for that was really wrong. We just had a big water and sewer increase. We're going through a COVID pandemic. To raise taxes on people, I just didn't feel good about. I wouldn't have been able to support that. So I appreciate that I feel heard and listened to, and I think you guys did a great job of what you did do. I'm a little concerned about taking money out of the general fund reserve. I don't love that, but I understand where you're coming from. I'm also wondering if in the future, it took a lot of time for you guys to all meet with us, either in groups of 2 or separately. That's a minimum of 3 meetings every time. Something Fargo does is they have their budget meetings like that publicly as a group. Is that something we'd want to consider? So it would take less staff time ultimately, just as an option. It might be more cost effective to consider something like that.
Certainly worthy of discussion, Commissioner. You have the seat at the table that you could certainly suggest that, so.
Okay, well, if there's a way to make a motion to do that in the future, I would do that.
Thank you. Commissioner JoDee.
Yeah, I would just like to, thank you guys for the hard work. I know getting it to 0 mills was a lot of effort and a lot of challenging conversations. I think it's important for us to realize, though, that we are making commitments in this budget that certainly lead us to believe that we're going to have to increase mills a year from now for the 2022 budget. I mean, I think, when we're talking about hiring 9 people, and we've found a way to stagger those hirings to save money, but that in and of itself is an example of where it's going to add expenses a year from now that we're going to have to deal with. And so that's going to lead to some conversations, next summer about, mill increases and or permanent cuts. And one of the ones I know I brought up in our budget conversation, and one that I think we should spend some time in this next year talking about before we work on the budget in next summer, is the West Fargo Airport. We have an airport that is paid for by all taxpayers, and rough count, a third of the people I've asked don't even know we have an airport. And I'm going to guess that 99+% have never or will never fly out of it. So to me, using taxpayer dollars to pay for something that an extreme minority of our residents utilize is not a great use of taxpayer money. So it's not a topic for tonight, but a topic that I think we should discuss along with any other ideas that could address the mill issue we're going to have a year from now.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Olson.
I agree with our city administrator's comments in our last paragraph covering the report, that we're going to need to, and it follows with what Commissioner JoDee, what we do today is going to affect what we do next year and the years beyond. We're going to have to adopt some kind of policy that we're going to have to do some incremental increases, whether we like it or not, because we can't keep taking from the general reserve, as that'll affect us in other ways.
Mr. Simmons?
Thank you. I will make a comment. Commissioner Olson, I don't disagree. We actually did that last year. We made that commitment when we were doing it. Tina knows that. But unfortunately, things happen, like you wearing your mask. We never knew that we'd have a pandemic on our hands. And so things do change. We have to be flexible as well. We can't just say today we're guaranteed we're going up 2 mills next year. I mean, some of this has to go through a process. So, and that's how I felt on that the entire time here, that this is a little bit unusual year, and we have to take that into consideration this year. Staggering the way you did that, Eric, and the way Tina actually and Jim did that, it's very much appreciative. But you're right. At the end of the day, we're still paying for some of those last year that we staggered. So, the truth be told, it's either we do raise the mill levy or we freeze maybe job positions, or we cut some. I don't like taking from the reserve either. Never have. But we can't just continue to hire either if everybody else isn't hiring. I mean, I understand we need people, but that's why they got to be crucial, and that's why I asked about Jenna's department, to me, that sounds very smart, that I don't like adding that position, but I guess if we can eliminate some other, get things more streamlined, I think I can go with that. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? I'd like to make a few comments also. First of all, I want to reach out and thank the department heads, the directors that we have, for their hard work and their understanding of, as Commissioner Simmons has said, the circumstances that we've been faced with this year. Early on in the budget analysis that we were doing, and I again want to thank Mr. Larson and Mrs. Fisk for the extended role that you've offered me this year in participating with those discussions. Greatly appreciated. But early on, we were forecasting that we were going to have a 20% reduction in sales tax revenues and a 20% less in highway fund allocation to us. We've had better news than that through the month of June. Actually, the month of June of 2020 was better than the month of June of 2019. So that's a positive thing, that things that are looking forward. The fact that, our state and certainly our communities are functioning. We're trying to get back to the new normal. But we have a very vibrant and growing community. I would challenge you all tonight and my fellow commissioners to take a look at the building inspection report and look at the pages and pages and pages of new houses that we're blessed to be having built in West Fargo. Every one of those new houses that we're building, and some of the infrastructure's in, granted, some of the streets are in, but that's going to make Matt Anvik plow that street, collect that garbage, the police department to patrol those streets to keep our citizens safe, our fire chief and his team to be out there on emergency calls, whether they're fire or emergency medical. We have, and as a community in the city of West Fargo, quite honestly have been the envy from a lot of communities across the state for a long time. But with that comes challenges. With that comes all the discussions that we've had, and I've had great discussions with my fellow commissioners. I've neglected to say when I thank the department heads, I thank the fellow commissioners for their engagement and their ideas and their suggestions. And we are all, 5 of us, cognizant of the fact of what we have to do the future going forward because of the reoccurring expenses that we're committing to from yesteryear and this year. So we're all going to have to dig deep as to how we're going to be resourceful enough to try and figure that out with the help of all of you and the help of our community patrons that continue to offer advice also. We're grateful for that. One of the other things that I hope that everyone understands that one of the roles I've played in this is the supporting of Mr. Larson and Mrs. Fisk on the cost reallocation of our detailed schedules. I'm too much of a layman to probably use the terms that I want to use, so I'll revert back to the fact I'm an elected official and I'll not use those. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been sharing employees, we've been having employees in departments they shouldn't have been in. And that's been a process, again, for this great commission, and now we welcome Ms. George to the commission. But previous commissions, they looked at it in a different manner. We have different experience, different talents, different opinions up here. That cost allocation in itself is critical to the city as we move forward and the success we're going to have. And I give all the credit in the world. Obviously, Mrs. Fisk is his supervisor, but Mr. Larson, that will prove to be huge for this community and for all of us, and we will be eternally grateful once we get that straightened as it should be. For example, in his report, he talks about the forestry department. We do a great job. the way the lack of personnel and what we do for a community this size is phenomenal. But we have to have it in the right place. We're upside down. We allocate 50 cents of our assessments to, how we generate revenue. It costs us $2. So again, to all the staff, to the administration, to my fellow commissioners, this has been a critical point, I think, in how we deal with the finances of this community. And we're not pointing fingers at the previous commissioners that they did anything wrong. They didn't. But it's now 2020, and we're now looking at a 2021 budget coming at us. And so, again, because of all the reoccurring expenses we have, we are going to be challenged as a commission moving forward on trying to keep this as affordable as can be. I agree with what we're doing this year because of the pandemic, because of people lost their jobs, because people lost revenues, and the eviction notices or whatever, the eviction thing released last week. So we want to be as compassionate as we possibly can to every resident in our community, regardless of what their social position is. But understand that the men and women that I'm working with every day in this city hall, and certainly this commission group up here, we're doing a good job for you. We can do better. Keep advising us from the public all that you can. But we'll do the best that we can with the dollars that we ask you to share with us. So, is there any further discussion with regard to the budget from any of my fellow commissioners?
Just a quick question.
Please.
What happens from here?
Mr. Larson is asking us to approve this preliminary budget. There's still time for discussions, for the like, but it will be coming forward that it will be a final budget. Jim, what day?
September 8th, so we are asking...
Will you be discussing it again then at that meeting, or is this it?
No, it can be discussed actually from now until September 8th.
Okay.
Or we'd hope a little earlier because we do have to get it prepped and ready. But basically, then September 8th, we're asking for it to be considered. There will be a public hearing for it.
Okay.
At that hearing, the public can speak towards it. The commission chose to not approve it because they feel there's additional adjustments. That is still available. You have actually till October 10th to make those adjustments.
So everything, none of us had a hard copy of this until this evening. I still don't, we have it on the screen. So we'll all have opportunity again to revisit all the things that they're saying in their summary reports about where some of those dollars came from. I would imagine there might be some department heads reach out to you and say, you were too dang tough on my equipment budget, or whatever the case might be. So we'll have plenty of time. Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you. The most important thing is that we can't go up. We can always go down from here, but we cannot go up. Important or not, I don't know, but that's the law, and that's why we have to do the preliminary first. So,
yes, sir.
So there's always time to come back.
Thank you for that point, Commissioner Simmons.
And we'll place hard copies in your mailboxes tomorrow. So you'll have them then to go through.
Anyone else? What's your pleasure, Commissioner?
I move we approve.
Commissioner Olson moves we approve the preliminary budget. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the 2021 preliminary budget as presented this evening.
And the hearing date?
And the hearing date?
September 8th.
September 8th. Thank you, Commissioner Olson. You should have wrote that down.
I wrote it down.
Yeah. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Larson. Next order of business is item number 12, the review and approve of the naming rights agreement of the POW MIA Plaza in the city of West Fargo. Mrs. Fisk.
Thank you, Commission President and Commissioners. Before you, we have an agreement that has been a long time coming. The VFW was granted the ability to have the naming rights to the plaza, and I believe that probably took place in 2017. I was trying to find the initial letter that actually was sent to them. But since that time, we had found that there wasn't actually a legal agreement that went with that. It was just a letter that said you will get the naming rights for 10 years for a cost of $30,000 a year for those 10 years. It didn't lay out anything like what do they get for that, what do they not get for that, what are the regulations, so on and so forth. So the purpose of this agreement is to lay all those parameters out so the city knows, so the VFW knows, and so that our events coordinating group, West Fargo Events, they know as well. So, I have it before you, and I will answer any questions, and John can as well. And, our request tonight is for you to review and approve.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisk. Questions from the commissioners? Mr. Simmons.
Thank you. Tina, I just want to make sure that, okay, so I'm certain we're going to approve this tonight without speaking prematurely, but has the VFW gotten their copy, and have you heard back from them in reference to, are they in agreement, or do we do it, I realize he's there, but or do we do it first and then send it to them? Or how does that work?
Drafts of this and discussions of this had gone to them some time ago, but as far as this right here and now, no. I have not reached out to them. I know I spoke with you, Commissioner Simmons, and you were going to see if there was somebody that would want to meet, but I never heard from them or anyone else. And then when I put it on the agenda, I thought, well, they'll reach out, but I haven't heard.
There's a gentleman here tonight, so.
Okay, okay.
We could, I guess.
Yep. Okay, Commissioner JoDee had a question.
Since there hasn't been an agreement that was signed, has this been being paid the last few years?
There was one payment made to date. I have to do the research to see if that puts them a year or 2 years behind or how that works. But there's been one payment made. I just need to look into it. It doesn't mean they're behind. We have to look into that some more.
I can answer some of that though, Mayor. Part of it was,
Commissioner
thank
Simmons.
you, part of it was just some confusion between the VFW and us, and they went through a couple different managers in the whole process, and so it was some confusion. The new commander I know, has definitely has that under control, so I think we're all on the same page, hopefully.
Yep.
But that's why it was just paid here not long ago.
Yes, and clearly, thank you, Commissioner Simmons. I wasn't trying to accuse them of being behind. I need to do more homework and work with them on that, or have Jim work with them on that.
Commissioner George.
Section 2.03, it talks about plaza monument. I was just wondering more about that. So the city is responsible for erecting a monument. Has that been done? Is that okay.
Yes, Commissioner George, that's the one that is already up there.
Okay.
Yep.
If there are no more questions, I'd make a motion to approve.
Any additional questions? We have in attendance, members of the VFW here.
Mr. Craig Johnson.
Yeah. Craig Johnson is here, Commander?
Yep.
Would is there anything that you'd like to add to this discussion? We thank you for coming. Okay. All right. A motion by Commissioner Simmons?
Yep.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner JoDee. It's been moved and seconded to approve the naming rights agreement of the POW MIA Plaza in the city of West Fargo with the VFW. Is there any further discussion?
I'm sorry, Commission President Dardis. I will make one more comment. If this is approved this evening, I will forward it to the VFW, and if they'd like to meet and go through it, we will do that. Thank you.
I would like to request, Mrs. Fisk, that our one veteran up here, that's a commissioner, Mr. Simmons, be included in that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yep. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Construction report, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Commissioner President Dardis, members of the Commission. Again, second meeting in a row, you've had a full plate, and I'm relieved to say I don't have much to report.
Thank you, sir. You're my new favorite.
Yes.
'cause earlier you weren't. Item number 14, City Administrator's Report, Mrs. Fisk.
Thank you. I'll save you the trouble of me getting up. Thank you, President Dardis and Commissioners. There's just a few items. One of them, first of all, I want to thank our communications staff for another very successful street fair. I saw Commission President Dardis walking around saying hi to everybody, and everything that I heard, everyone was very impressed, and they were very impressed with our staff, which again makes me very proud of the people that we have that work for us. We're very fortunate. So, a successful day and a successful event when I learned how to talk. You all received an email along with our department heads from Emily on the North Dakota League of Cities. That will be a virtual annual conference this year. And so you can look through it, and if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, if you would like Emily to sign you up, let us know and she can get you signed up. And we'll just take it from there. If you sign yourself up, that's fine too. Just if there's a cost, then the cost comes back to the city and we'll reimburse you. The next item is Dennis Otterness has completed we've completed all the background, drug screens, all the things you have to do to be a police person here, which is insane. He has passed all of his backgrounds and all of his testing, and so his plan is to be in attendance at the September 8th meeting to be sworn in as the new police chief for the city of West Fargo. And the last item, but not the least, is that we're preparing the letters to go out for all the special assessment districts that were moved forward from the 2019 bond issue. And again, that's approximately 14 districts. And so all those letters are getting prepared and will go out, and they will also reference where to find information on the website and the paper, and staff's been working really hard. They've done a fantastic job between Dustin in engineering and communications, Melissa in communications, and also Jim in finance. So I've got to hand it to them. It's a huge task. It's kind of ironic. They were trying to upload the notices for the paper, and they were so large because of the number of parcels that they kept rejecting and busting the system at the forums. So we're very, very close to getting those all sent out, because the hearings are to be held with the Special Assessment Committee August 18th and August 31st. And then once they complete their work, it will come forward to commission, and there will be another hearing then. So I wanted to make you aware of that, and that's about all I have, unless you have something for me.
Questions for Mrs. Fisk? You have any correspondence to share with us?
I have one letter that I emailed out to you that you had put in my mailbox today, Bernie, from the theater. I don't even know which area. It's in Moorhead.
Yep, the logo's right up on top, Theater B.
Yeah, it says Theater B. I don't want to say it wrong, but anyway, they were thanking us for our contributions to the Arts Partnership. So that is an email to all of you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisk. Moving on to item number 16, non-agenda items. Does any commissioner have anything that they'd like to bring forward this evening?
Yes.
I'll do the date. Did I forget?
Oh, thank you, yes.
All right. Commissioner Olson.
I'd like to get a little report on the event that was held at the Lights on Saturday night. How was the social distancing maintained? Did they meet what was required of them, or how did it go?
I have not gotten, I sent emails back and forth with Mike Amundson, and he's supposed to be providing a report that I can forward to all of you as commissioners. So I will get that information out to you as soon as I get it. He asked me today for clarification on what needed to be in there. And so I clarified that, and I will get that to you. I do have pictures I got pictures of them doing temperature checks and masking and all that kind of stuff, but I just can't confirm that social distancing was everywhere, because you just like in the street fair, you can't force people to separate if they don't want to separate. But I do know that they made a lot of efforts, but I don't have the report back yet.
I just want to point out that in our packet, page 58, which is referencing the Westfest Parade, that under the green and low level risk that we're at right now, that we are to cancel gatherings of any size where distancing cannot be maintained. And it is the highest risk for in large gatherings where it's difficult for individuals to maintain space at least 6 feet apart. And attendees are traveling from outside the area. So I don't see how we can have a concert on Saturday night again, which there's one scheduled.
Thursday night.
Thursday night?
Thursday night.
Okay, I got my dates wrong. So I don't feel we should allow this concert to go forth because it was not maintained during this concert.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Additional comments, questions?
I do, Mayor. I'm gonna object to that totally for the simple reason that if you had that concern, we should have already put it on the agenda. You cannot bring up something like this on a non-agenda item and then have an action on it without informing the parties that to participate in this. You cannot bring this forward and say, well, we're gonna do an action on an item now, and they're not even here to defend themselves. That's wrong. That's like the public too. I did get a report from Mike, a personal text, and he said that, you know, and I do have pictures right here, Brad. Actually, I have 3 of them. I'm sorry, I gave them to you. I'll pass them down to you. Those are what they tried to do as far as everybody was required to wear a mask when they went in. They had all the...
when they entered? When
they entered, they're required to wear a mask. They did temperature checks. They did social distancing. They did everything they could do, and later in the night, you know, people did start to gather. That's going to happen. But everybody, he said, just like the street fair, they said they were so thankful that this was open and they could come and see this stuff. I realize it's a 50-50 here. We have 50% of the population that doesn't like it, and we have 50% that does. And so we're kind of at this guessing game, and that's totally fine with me, but I oppose totally that we bring this up and make an action vote out of this tonight without having them here. That would be out of line to me. That's totally non-transparent. Exactly what we're trying to prohibit.
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Please, Commissioner JoDee.
I'll just, you know, going back to Brad's comment though, I will say that in our last meeting, we voted to enforce the state guidelines, which is what he stated. So, I mean, it's up for a lot of interpretation as to how well social distancing was or wasn't maintained. But I mean, that is the state guideline, and we voted to have West Fargo events enforce the state guideline.
And I'm just saying, I think that they did, but let's let them come forward and talk about it. We can't make a motion when we haven't even invited them here to discuss this. And I don't believe that we should be making any motions under a non-agenda item. It should have been on the agenda anyway, to give the public some perspective too here. Because we start shutting one down, we're gonna have to look at all of them.
That's what, if I was gonna make a motion, it would be to shut them all down.
Well, I'm not, you know,
Okay.
Again, I'm totally fine with what you're saying.
Mhm.
I just don't think this is the time, I don't think this is the time to do it, and I don't think we can.
But we as the city commission, we have the responsibility to look out for everybody's health and well-being, and we shouldn't have to get the promoters or the managers of these events approval if we...
How about the people though? How about the citizens? Shouldn't we hear from them before we do something like this? We're giving them no time to come and talk to us. We're doing this totally against what we have said we're gonna be, and that's transparent.
We gave them the one opportunity to prove that they could do social distancing.
We don't know that they didn't. You're looking at a
We have
couple pictures.
all over where there's
Well,
no social distancing whatsoever, no mask being worn inside after they get through the line.
I agree, but then let's look at the street fair. There's no way they could social distance, and I want that street fair more than anybody, but they couldn't do it either, Brad. Then what you're saying tonight is we should shut everything down. That's what you're saying.
The large gatherings.
Well, street fair, how about West Fest? That's still gonna be well over what you're talking about, Commissioner Jervik. You know, even if we take out the parade, that's still gonna be well over.
And I would include cruise night.
Cruise night too, you wanna shut that down? No, disagree. And I don't think, again, I will just make my objection. This is not the time to make a motion on anything. We didn't do it right. We gotta wait. If you wanna bring it up in 2 weeks, then by all means bring it back and we'll have that discussion. But I don't think we should be having it under a non-agenda item.
I agree with Mark 100%.
Is there any other discussion for non-agenda items? Is there anything that would like to come forward this evening?
I guess
Commissioner JoDee.
I'll just ask the question of our city attorney, because more out of just curiosity as to the objection for future reference. What's the answer?
Well, there's somewhat of a nuance here that, in that you do have with West Fargo Events, you have an agreement in place. And my concern without having them here is we have an agreement with West Fargo Events. They've probably already sold tickets. If we probably want, at least, since they're our partner under the agreement, we probably at least want to have their input before you shut them down, because they may have potential claims against the city. In a normal situation in which you don't have those contractual obligations, generally you can add something to the agenda if it's okay with either the chair or the board says we're okay with adding something to the agenda. But this one's a little bit different because we have the contract with West Fargo Events.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Can I answer your question, Commissioner JoDee?
I just think it needs to be reviewed more in depth.
It is duly noted and will be on the agenda at our next meeting.
Yes, I just have one thing to add, and with full transparency in mind, I'm the only one that attended that event, and so I can say firsthand how it was. Everybody's temperature was taken at the door. Every single person was wearing a mask to the entrance. I think West Fargo Events did what they could to follow the guidelines to the best of their ability. With that being said, social distancing was probably a genuine issue, and I think going forward, I wouldn't support canceling, but I would support maybe coming up with better policies or something to help work with social distancing in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner George. Anyone else? For the public record, we also put together, through the commission, I had requested this, an event agreement checklist that West Fargo Events, it's a 2-page document, and some of the protocols are listed in here. For example, chairs being placed 6 feet apart. And as Commissioner George has said, once it started, it's difficult when you have 1,500, 1,600, 1,800 people there, that if they're going to start moving chairs around, how are you going to possibly deal with it? And that's part of the dilemma that we all have up here. But with regard to hand sanitation, temperature testing, the masks when they entered, signage delineating where all the safety features are, continued cleaning of the restroom and door handles and all that, I have in my hand that Mr. Amundsen and Mrs. Fisk. Who's the other signature, Tina? I can't read it.
Lance Johnson, he is a representative for Epic Events. Epic Events are the ones that actually rented the plaza from West Fargo Events.
Yes, and I have both of those checklists here. I asked for them this morning, which Mrs. Fisk provided them to me. Screening questions, 2 people at each entry. Staff and supplies in place, over and above what the protocols require. So we have a lot of discussion to take place, and I feel closer to what Ms. George says, is that if, in fact, we have evidence by the photographs and the like that there needs to be some changes done to this, then I think we need to make some changes, more restrictions. I will struggle to vote to cancel, honestly. But I won't struggle at all if we have to do some additional things with regard to restrictions to protect our community and our society. So that's, is there any other non-agenda items that we'd like to talk about? Mrs. Fisk has one.
I need to make a request to change the official meeting date from September 7th to September 8th due to the Labor Day holiday.
September 7th is the Labor Day holiday, and the request is to change it to Tuesday rather than Monday.
Do you need a motion on that?
Please.
I'll make a motion to do that.
Commissioner Simmons moves, or second?
Second.
Commissioner Olson second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there any other business that should come before the commission this evening? Commissioner Simmons?
Thank you. I'll gladly make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Olson seconds. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
My goodness. My heart can't take it anymore, you guys. I'm having the big one.